let's begin.
So he's on a PT over everything.
Good morning, guys. Or afternoon.
Like,
hey!
it's hard to make a case for a jug over a sin in a lot of scenarios. Like, there's not many things that I cannot do on a sin that I can do on a jug. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but in this case,
I'm
we're
so sorry to
pretty
hear
much
that.
just talking about, like, I mean, this is geared towards story mode operation.
No, exactly.
We are live, everyone. How are we doing?
Pretty, I don't know, awake. I'm having alarms still go off.
If you could just go ahead and either whisper VAS or X up an endgame, that would be great.
What is this server discovery thing in Discord?
It's a new feature.
Yeah, apparently. Look at that. Official Fortnite has 100,000 on the dot. On how much I just want to ruin that. It's 100,000 even. Oh, man.
All right, guys. All right, gonna send out an invite now. Our last Sorc Tilida will be here. He had a guild meeting, so he'll be here momentarily. So while we are waiting for Swartz to come, I thought maybe we can introduce you guys. Have a moment where you guys introduce yourself to the stream and introduce yourself to chat. Why don't we start with Bishop? Bishop, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your experience here in Star Wars.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm a Sorc heal main. I mean, okay. I am a tank main far and away. I've been tanking things that actually matter since 2.0. I don't really count my experience in 1.0 because I marred with Deadly Sabre off to the side of my bar where I never saw it again. I was full on, you know, we're sitting there wondering why we're enraging on guards 20 times. And I'm in full T&E's gear, no relics, no augment, spamming Vicious Slash. It's like, maybe we just need to try again. No, that's not. Anyway, so I've been tanking since 2.0. I really enjoy it. I like tanking because I feel like it is the best way, and it's fun to control the fight. Like when I DPS or when I heal, I can see the effect that a tank has on the fight. Like far and away, when I'm healing and another tank loses aggro on their tentacle and slams the entire group, I'm like, dear God, why? So it's far more enjoyable for me to be the one, you know, dictating where things are gonna, you know, how the fight's gonna go. In the sense that it's a thankless job, I don't mind that. I find that, you know, a good tank tends to go unnoticed the most because shit, you're just doing your job, right? You know, what's the point of thinking that?
What drew you to tanking to begin with?
I don't know, dude. They said we need a tank, and I said, dude, I have a ton, I'll do it. There wasn't like some calling I had. This was pretty much the first Trinity role game that I ever played. It was just something that I fell into, I guess. And once I did, I got into the math. I really enjoyed the optimization of tanking. I enjoyed the different playstyles you could do. It wasn't a strict, you know, distribution like we have for DPS or healers. You have a pretty generous threshold, and you can make whatever works for you work for you the best. And I find that really appealing. So, but like I said, my favorite aspect of it is being able to dictate the control of a fight, and you kind of exist in a bubble of your own in the sense that, you know, you do your job so that everybody else can do theirs better. But you're the first line. You're the first one who needs to be doing your shit right for everybody else to do theirs. And I like that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I will say that Bishop is probably one of the best tanks in the game. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here and talking just a little bit about tanking. Tom,
Yeah.
Why don't you introduce yourself to the stream? Introduce yourself to chat.
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm a healer main most of the time. I dabble in DPS. You'll most of the time see me on an operative because I find it really fun, but I do heal on all 3 classes.
How long have you been healing?
In a NIM type environment for only like less than a year, but in general, I've been playing the game for 2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years? That's awesome. What is your favorite class to heal on?
I started on Sorc. I find it really fun, but my favorite is Operative because there's never any downtime for me to be bored.
I guess that makes sense. Well, we are looking forward to talking to you more about healing, especially operative healing, because that's your big deal. So thanks so much for taking the time to be here. Splizza, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I am doing great, thank you. Why don't you introduce yourself to stream?
Hi, stream. I'm Splizza. I've been playing since launch. Used to, for the first couple of years of the game, or majority of 1.0 and then early parts of 2.0, I was maining a Sorc healer, which is Splizza. He would also double as a DPS for PvP, but in PvE, I mainly just Sorc healed. I did play other roles. I leveled up with every class within the first 6-7 months of the game. And by the time DF hard mode hit, I transitioned to DPSing full time and pretty much rotated between, depending on the tier, between the 3 ranged classes, Merc, Sniper, and Sorc.
And what is your favorite class to DPS on?
Well, in current game, my favorite class is Merc. If the output was a little bit better from Madness, that would probably be my favorite, but that's a class where the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
I've never heard that phrase before. That's awesome. Okay, awesome. I know a lot of people really enjoy Madness, so looking forward to talking to you a little bit more about Madness. Our last guest is going to be Sorc Tilde. He is the GM of Lightning Masters on Satil Shan. I'll let him introduce himself when he comes into the stream. But a little bit, I am Lady Rand, also known as Vass, Zanir, take your pick. I've got 60 more. I have been playing since about a month after launch, and I was the scrubbiest of scrubs. I was that mercenary that was running around with the wrong cell. So, I was in Arsenal, and I was running around with the IO cell on, and I had no cares in the world.
Pyro!
Pyro! So, I main Lightning Sorc, Telekinetic Sage, through most of 2.0. I have also mained Gunslinger / Sniper, and I generally prefer ranged DPSs. Played Merc for a little bit, made Merc for a little bit in 3.0, but DPS main, indeed. So currently I am, for Nightmare, I rotate between a Sniper DPS and a Power Tech DPS, but I am pretty bad on Power Tech, so I'm going to defer to you guys on Power Tech. So, but that's a little bit about me. That's a little bit about our panelists today, and then when Schwartz gets in, we'll be talking about a little bit about Schwartz and all of that good stuff. So, guys, let's talk a little bit about what exactly is raiding. What are operations? What is your experience with raiding and operations in Star Wars: The Old Republic?
The only reason to play.
I thought it was. I mean, come on, Space Princess Barbie. We all know that is the correct.
Yes, okay. My outfit love definitely is secondary. Like, I will not. Here's what the appeal is for me. Every boss in the game, anytime I'm in an op, I have to change outfits. So per boss, I change outfits.
Same.
That's it. So it's raiding and it's outfit designer. That is the reason I'm playing this game, in that order.
I don't know that it's the only reason to play the game. I think that's being disrespectful towards farming uprisings.
Anybody want to do Fractured?
If you had a choice between doing 8-man content or 16-man raiding, which one would you prefer and why?
8-man.
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 Okay, that's a loaded question. Like,
Yeah.
yes, 8-man, because 8-man is balanced more correctly. The reasons 16-man, because 16-man content could be great. Other games do 20, even have done 40-man, 40-person raids. The problem is this particular engine does not perform well. I mean, all you have to do is take a look at your frame rate when running the bug boss on Ossus, and you'll see a dip in your performance. Regardless of how good your system is, it's going to be performing less optimally than it would otherwise.
So, aside from optimal spec-wise, engine-wise, what is it about 8-man rating besides balance, besides mechanics, whatever? What is it about 8-man content that draws you to endgame rating?
I think the fair answer here is to say that 16-man is just a little easier, you know, in the sense of balance. I think it's fair to say that you can have 1 or 2 DPS die on a lot of fights and you'll still be okay. It's really not the case in 8-man.
Yeah.
So in 8-man, everyone has to pull their own weight, correct?
Right, and that's how it should be in 16 as well. There are certain instances where the 16-man fight is more difficult than the 8, but that's the exception and not the rule. If things were balanced more correctly and it ran better for everyone, then I think 16-man would have potential to be, just as fun or more fun than 8.
Gotcha.
I think people run 8 because of those issues, because 16-man in this game has always kind of been treated like a meme.
Gotcha. So the thing about rating/operations, rating is what we typically call it, but operations are what they're actually called here in Star Wars: The Old Republic. 8-man operations versus 4-man flashpoints. Mechanics are harder. There's more rewards and higher difficulties. There's a chance for real team building. I don't know about you guys, but in a lot of the Nightmare or Master Mode teams that I've been on, I have walked away with lifelong friendships. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about raiding as a whole, is it also teaches you how to rely on your teammates. It's not just, run into a flashpoint, solo all of the bosses, or just, queue up with a whole bunch of random people, walk through the flashpoint, check out the story, enjoy the story. But with raiding, which is 8 to 16-man content, that's a lot harder, depending on the difficulty. That brings together, it requires you to really know your teammates, especially if you do it regularly. What about you guys? What do you feel about why do you guys raid in endgame?
Tom, you want to go? I think I cut you off a little earlier.
Nah, it's fun. I raid in endgame because of people. I enjoy meeting people, and I enjoy, other than doing NIM content with my raid team, I enjoy teaching people hard modes and story modes and going through the content, because I have the patience to I have the patience to sit there and go like, all right, this is the mechanic, this is how you do it, and so I've got 2 or 3 teams that I sit on, that I go in and I teach the mechanics and I try and help people, because I want people to succeed in the raiding community.
And raiding is fun. That's one of the things that I enjoy about it, is that it's fun. At first glance, progressing on a boss, and progressing as in like failing a fight, rezzing and coming back and starting over again, but seeing inching progress, seeing, oh, we got past this percentage, or we got to this phase. This is the first time we've gotten to this phase as a team. That type of progression, at first glance, it might seem really overloading. It might seem really boring. But as you get there, as you start that master mode, as you start doing those difficult contents, it actually brings quite a feeling of success. And pardon me for using this phrase, but pride and accomplishment, it's a real thing. But
It's definitely a sense of completion.
yes.
And so for players, like a lot of players that play these games, they are completionists, and you've got that big old chunk of stuff missing that basically insinuates that you know how to play the game at least a capable level.
That's true. So let's talk a little bit about what are the current operations in the game. So we actually just had a new instance boss drop called Hive of the Mountain Queen, but there are I don't know if any. I've had a great time with Hive of the Mountain Queen. I think the area is really gorgeous. I really like the mechanics. I like the different phases for Hive of the Mountain Queen. But let's talk a little bit about what the current operations in the game are. So everybody knows that the first operation is Eternity Vault. Eternity Vault, or EV for short. What is your Anybody have any great stories about Eternity Vault? I know Bishop was talking a little bit about Garge.
Dude, why are we enraging?
Bishop, tell us a little bit about your experience in Eternity Vault.
Like, I mean, I did. I touched on it earlier, but for anybody who wasn't here, like I said, long story. I brought a terribly geared Marauder in 1.0 to hard mode, or was it night? I don't remember.
It was hard
They're
mode.
the same thing. What? Yeah, hard mode. There you go. Nightmare. To EV. I mean, the gear you wanted was Kalumi or Kalumi, however you say it. I was full TNEs. I didn't have relics. I didn't have augments. I had one of my main abilities, Deadly Saver, off to the side. I used Rupture when I felt like it. Annihilate on cooldown. I know I did that right. And until I could use Vicious Throw, I just used Vicious Slash, and like that was it. That's what I did. And it became so bad that I had kind of a big speech I typed out every single time we got to Garge.
Like, yes, the Garge speech.
It was 2 paragraphs of mocking Garge for how many times we wiped on him. So that holds a special place in my heart, as I do everything else in the game that I can. You know, it's very hard to forget those humble beginnings. So EV definitely was a just terrible. but now, you know, it's kind of a meme hop. So I don't know. It's a fun operation to go back and look at every now and then.
Do you remember any of your Garge speech? Do you remember any of it?
God, no, I stopped doing that in like 2013. There he is.
Hi, Schwartz.
Sorry about that.
All good. All good. We just want to introduce yourself to stream. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience here in Star Wars: The Old Republic.
Okay. Sure. I guess I go by mostly Schwartz, but people might know me from different names. I'm the GM of Lightning Masters, which is I don't want to make a claim that's false, but I think member-wise it's the biggest Nightmare raiding guild on Satil Shan. I've full cleared all of the old Nims numerous times, including time runs, and currently 2 of 5 in God's Nim.
Congratulations.
Haven't really gotten much time on the hut, but we've killed Tithe a whole bunch of times. I've lost count, and killed Annie, I think 3 or 4 times now.
3 or 4 times? That's awesome.
At least 4
yesterday, right?
Hmm?
TLM down Tithe yesterday, right?
Yeah, we did.
Congratulations. What is your favorite class to DPS on?
It's between Merc, Jug, and Marauder, to be honest. Those are probably the 3 that I'm best at.
Gotcha. And how long have you been playing Star Wars: The Old Republic?
I think it's coming up on 3 years.
Oh, that's awesome.
I haven't been around as much as some other people have, but I started in towards the beginning of 4.0. It was
4.0. Gotcha. Awesome. So we're talking a little bit about Eternity Vault and the other operations that are in Star Wars: The Old Republic right now. We had a great story from Bishop regarding him and his first experience in hard mode Eternity Vault, where we wiped on Garge for 6 hours. It was pretty great.
We cleared it, by the way. We eventually
did.
And we gave full credit to the dude we brought in. There was no blame assigned to me.
That is true. That is very true. So, this is where Eternity Vault is located. It is located on the Zioth Shadow in the mission deck. So very up towards the top here on the map. You can also find the story mission location here. So I've already done it, but if you click on this gentleman here General Threndolt, if I pronounce his name correctly. This is the gentleman that will give you the story mission into Eternity Vault. So, next in the line of progression of operations is Caracas Palace, or also known as KP. Does anybody have any good stories about Caracas Palace?
I have a bunch
Bellhat
of bad
method.
stories about it.
What do you mean?
They all involve farming the ads at the beginning of Final
Oh.
Oh, yes.
So here's an actual. So before I made Paramount, I made Paramount in the middle of 2.0. Before that, I was in a guild called Fearless Arms, and Fearless Arms still exists. They're still, I still have a character in the guild. They're a great guild on the pub side, really friendly people. But so they just had fun. They would dabble in Nightmare, but it was more of a just a hard mode raiding guild for the most part. And so what we did with KP, Karaga, he drops fire, or his little puddles of fire and oil or whatever. So over the course of however many weeks we would run it, and each week the tank would do a different letter to spell out Fearless Arms. So then you'd take a screenshot of the floor at the end, and so you'd have a big F and then a big E and a big A, and eventually they had a bunch of screenshots chained together to say Fearless Arms. So that whatever letter we were on that week dictated what pattern we kited Karaga in.
I have an interesting story about Karaga and the Flames. My boyfriend and then Bishop and I were in Caracas Palace with a specific guild, and my boyfriend, who was playing a shadow tank at the time, decided that, no, he was on his Vanguard, decided that he was going to kite the Karaga oil in the shape of a penis.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I remember.
You remember that? We promptly got kicked out of the guild. Yes.
This is what I mean when I say I didn't pay attention. I just went. So anytime he got kicked out of a guild, I'm like, oh, I guess I'm leaving too.
It was pretty funny.
We got kicked from a lot.
We did. It was mostly because of him.
I know.
So this is where Caracas Palace is located. It's right here on the map. And there actually used to be Nightmare, Eternity Vault, and Caracas Palace, but that was removed in, was it 3.0 or was it 4.0 that those Nightmare modes were removed from these two operations?
4. Go support AX's thread on the forum. Bring back EVKP. I'm serious.
4.0. Yep.
I'm serious. Go support it.
I would love to.
Look at the post. It's a really good post.
I will. You get the story mission for Caracas Palace here from this droid, YD33, which is located here on the Zioth Shadow. So right here is where you can pick up the story mission, and that is part 2 of what we consider the Dreadmaster's story arc. The next in the story progression of operations is Explosive Conflict, otherwise known as EC. I don't like Explosive Conflict. It's probably my least favorite operation.
There's a lot of good stories about EC.
There are a lot of good stories about EC. Does somebody have one that they'd like to tell about EC?
You have your med pack. I mean, literally, my first time in NIM, it's like, oh yeah, do you have a med pack? Why do I need a med pack? Like, why do you need a med pack? Because this is beginning of my NIM career, as it would be. It's like, all right, we're going. It's like no one told me I needed a med pack. I don't know why I'm dead. What's beradium poisoning? What the hell is that?
What's beradium? Oh man, I mean, just between tanks and minefield, it's a very mechanic-heavy operation, and it's probably the first. What I like to think of operation-wise is that EV is your beginner. That's the one that really introduces you to 8 to 16 man content, and then you go into KP, which involves a lot more mechanics, such as the droid boss, such as the knockback. Yeah, I mean, well, it's the droid boss. That's true. That's true. But it introduces you to raids or operation-specific mechanics. And then EC is the culmination. And this is probably, of the 3 original that were in Vanilla and 1.0, the 3 original operations, EC was probably the hardest when it came to the level 50 operations, when it came to mechanics. So, people still wipe on tanks. People still wipe on Kefis. Kefis still hits really, 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 really hard. People still wipe on Minefield. So, I'm looking forward to talking to you guys a little bit more about EC and the EC mechanics. The story mission for EC is actually located inside the instance. There's this little droid that you see over here. When you first enter the operation, you can go back through the shuttle, and we'll show you how to do that when we cover EC. And you can talk to that droid over there, and we move forward from there. All right, next in the Dreadmaster story arc, we have Terror from Beyond, also known as TFB. My favorite story I love to tell about TFB was the first time I actually ever did anything besides 4-man content. I was on my Scoundrel. He was level 50. That's because back then, at the level 50 cap. And there was somebody advertising in Fleet. They were looking for a DPS and a tank for Terror, the last boss. And I was like, hey, I'll do that. I'm bored. I have no idea what I'm doing. I had no idea what TFB was. I had no idea what raiding or 8-man content was. And so I whisper the guy, I'm like, hey, I'll DPS. And the guy responds to me and he asks, do you know how to DPS? And me, in my knowledge, in my great gaming career, thought, yes, I know how to press my DPS buttons.
Shoot bird.
I know how to press my buttons. So I was like, yeah, totally. I totally know what I'm doing. Totally. And they invited me into the group. And we didn't have anything, we sat there for a while. And finally it was like, we need a tank. And I was like, well, I have a Guardian. He just hit level 50. I don't know how to tank, but I'd be happy to do it. And they're like, all you have to do is just taunt the tentacle. I was like, okay, I can do that. I died 5 times.
Very nice.
In the course of that. Nice. Very cool, right? 5 times in the course of that fight. I died 5 times. I got stealth rezzed 3 times. I got regular rezzed twice. And it freaked me out. I had no idea what I was doing. They were yelling at me to turn the tentacle away from the raid. I didn't know how to taunt swap on the scream. So that's my favorite story about Archimedes, my Guardian, and Terror from Beyond. Does anybody have anything else about Terror from Beyond that they'd like to, that they consider a fond memory?
Oh god. The reason I hate 16-man content. This is quite recently. It was probably like 3 months ago. 7 stealth rezzes.
Oh.
7 in 16-man content. And I'm sitting here like, why are people dying?
Well, you gotta blame the healer.
Tentacles. And this is 16-man hard mode. People are dying to slams.
Oh,
like
no.
2 or 3 at a time. So it's like, stealth out, pick up the bodies, let's go.
How? I want to know how.
Same. So this is where TFB, or Terror from Beyond, is located, on the Xyal Shadow. A majority of the ops are located on Xyal Shadow. Starting from Oricon is when they are not. So it's right here. This is the entrance. The story mission is located over to the left. This gentleman talking to the Gree over here, Colonel Jadek. You talk to him to begin your Terror from Beyond story.
Oh, wait, I have
All right. So
I have one.
Oh, you have one? Do tell.
Yeah, just a fond memory of TFBs, very recent as well. When I was DPS, and this is master mode, whatever. And my man Cat was tanking for the tentacle on my side. So we get to the first one. I think it's the 3rd tentacle and the first ad spawn. And the mechanic for that, for anybody who doesn't know, is that the tank, does not want to get close to the larva that spawns. So if it's not dead by the time it gets closer to the tank will, kite it away a little bit. So we're doing that, and I leap to it. I'm going ham. I'm like, dang, this thing should die any second now. He might have to move back 1 or 2 steps. And Cat goes, oh, wait, there's an ad there. 1 whole second later, he explodes me, him, wipe the raid, and I'm like, I am so glad that you wanted to sit there and say there is an ad rather than just moving backwards. Like, you are on top of the game, my man. So that was probably way more fun than tanking any TFB has ever. Was that pull right there?
Was that
Joker
pull?
the PT tanked. Yeah. Oh my god.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. All right, so next up, operations-wise, is Scum and Villainy. Scum and Villainy is currently the longest operation in the game with a grand total of 7 bosses? 8 bosses? So Scum and Villainy is also a very mechanic-heavy operation. Styrak hard mode is currently the hardest. It's like one of the hardest DPS checks in the game regarding for hard mode, correct?
What is Styrak?
Styrak.
Yeah, in hard mode. Yeah, it's well, not anymore, but it is.
Not anymore.
Was one of the more substantial DPS checks in terms of a hard mode.
There's also 2 puzzle bosses, Olok and Oasis City. So I actually really enjoy Scum and Villainy. Lots of people read it for component runs because it has the most that you can get. SMV is also known as, or Scum and Villainy is also known as SMV. The story mission is located here, right in front of the entrance. You just talked to this guy right here. It's located here, right next to Terror from Beyond. Does anybody have any good stories about Scum and Villainy at all? Aside from mine, Dragon Slayer, which is the nightmare title you get for completing Scum and Villainy under 2 hours, was one of my most coveted titles because I wanted it for my Sage, and when I finally got it, I was so exceptionally happy. So, but does anybody have any funny stories about SMV?
Oh god. The bridge boss.
Oh yeah, the bridge boss.
Bridge
And
boss!
And, like, I don't know, I was a meme on my Sage, so it's like, I knew the correct place to sit by the hole and pull someone on a speeder so they'd fall to their death.
That is amazing. We consider it a little bit of a rite of passage. You know, you have to die to the bridge boss at least once, then you are a raider. Correct? Anybody else feel like that? At least it is for me.
I don't know about that, but I feel like the bigger thing is like, you don't tell new players about it and just watch them die.
Oh,
So
L's
mean.
force pull. Yes.
L's force pull. Okay,
Oh,
what is L's
no.
force pull?
Shorts, were you
right.
there?
That's where it
That's
started.
double face palm, babe.
Oh my god.
Shorts, call it, dog. If you don't, I will.
I mean, so, oh my god. So basically, this wasn't a Sniper Science 16 man, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So Elsha is she's a tank in Lightning Masters, and I mean, she's in a bunch of other guilds, but she's primarily in Lightning Masters, and she's on one of our teams. And this was a while ago. He was tanking for 16-man Sniper Science, 16-man direct. And I guess we'll probably get into this eventually. But one of the mechanics of Styrak Nightmare is that if you've ever seen it in any other mode, you know that he spawns a chain manifestation, which is this gigantic ad in the middle, and there's 4 around that are linked by a beam, and you have to kill the one in the middle before the ones with the beams get to the center. Otherwise, it's an instant wipe for the whole group. In Nim, however, that DPS check cannot be passed before they get to the middle. However, the ads are not immune to knock, so you have to knock them back. Rather, they don't have boss immune, so you can stun them, you can knock them back. You just can't like do a soft CC on them for 60 seconds. Anyway, so what this also means is that they can be pulled. And what Elle did is she's an assassin tank, which assassins get this ability in their tree, in the darkness tree. It's called Force Pull, which generates a lot of threat, and on a non-boss immune ad, it will pull them to your location. So, on the second to last chain manifestation before they were going to go into burn, one of the knockbacks gets missed up. Elle panics. She tabs to one of the outer ones and force pulls it to the center and insta wipes the group.
Somebody stunned it. Somebody said, "Oh, I got it."
So I think one of the things that we're trying to show you here at the same time is that even Nightmare Raiders make mistakes. So mistakes happens. So don't be afraid.
It's a great clip of it.
It's a great clip. Very cool. Very cool.
Good clip. It's like there's several seconds of what in the world just happened.
And
How
also,
did we go from stun to wipe?
It's funny because this sets up the perfect segue to the next operation that came out.
Indeed.
Well, actually, the other thing, this is kind of a personal, but S&V hard mode is the first hard mode besides fucking EV and KP that I cleared.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome that you have fond memories of that.
Yeah.
So Scum and Villainy is where we first are introduced to an actual Dreadmaster, Dreadmaster Styrak.
That's not true. It's right after EC. It's the first time.
That's true, but that's
like
where
a
we
boss.
fight our Dreadmaster for the first time, is Dreadmaster Styrak. We are introduced in EC and KP where they make their appearances after the Belsavis Imperial storyline arc.
Also, they talk a bunch in TFP.
They do. They do talk a bunch. That is Dreadmaster Calpheus you hear yelling at Kephis. We have no use for a tool that continues to break. And
Sykes, India.
see ya, India! Right? So, anyway,
Well,
okay.
we'll talk about that when it comes.
We will talk. Yeah, we're gonna have special episodes featuring each one of the operations, so we can talk more about that. So that leads into Oricon, which was released in 2.0 with the Rise of the Hutt Cartel. This is Dread Fortress. This is located on the planet of Oricon. There is a planetary story arc that ends in the Dread Fortress, Dread Palace raids. I know from people talking to me that lots of people end up skipping Oricon as a whole because it ends in operations. It ends in Dread Fortress and Dread Palace. So I know a lot of people that don't know about the culmination of a 2.5-year-old story of the Dreadmasters because of this very reason. So the Dread Ops are actually one of my favorite operations. Dread Fortress, Dreadmaster Brontes is currently, I would say, aside from the new Nightmare Gods of the Machine, Dreadmaster Brontes is currently one of the hardest Apex bosses in the game. What exactly is the hardest Apex boss in the game?
Well, it's definitely the hardest outside of Gods.
Right.
But
Right.
I honestly, having done Gods, taking gear into account, Tithe is harder than Brontes just because of how much randomness there is in it.
Okay.
And like, there's more to react to. I'd say A&E is probably about on par because like there's a lot of mechanical stuff. Nahad is harder. Haven't seen Skyva and haven't seen Isaacs, but from what I understand, Skyva is not that hard and Isaacs is.
The actual challenge to Brontes, when it comes down to it, actually is the RNG factor, though, in terms of.
That is true.
Having tanked that, I disagree.
So what exactly is Apex? What does that mean?
It means the final boss in the operation.
Final
Top
boss.
of the line, baby.
Top of the line. So that's going to be Terror from Beyond. It's going to be Dreadmaster Styrak. It's going to be Dreadmaster Brontes, Dread Council. Any other ones that we would consider Apex bosses? Or is it just those 5?
There's
I mean, like Revan and Cortani are technically Apex because they're the end of an operation, but they're not NIM because those operations don't have NIM.
That's correct. All right, so Dread Fortress and Dread Palace can be accessed through. You can either do go to the heroics, which is found in the activities section of your toolbar, and then you just go to daily area Oricon after you've unlocked it. You can also pick up the story missions starting on your ship. There's also a droid on the fleet that I will be showing you on the fleet where you can pick up the start of the Oricon mission itself. So, moving on, after you defeat Dread Fortress, the storyline will move you to Dread Palace. You can also, just by the way, this is the best Tauntaun in the game. Best Tauntaun mount, period.
X.
Access by doing the Dread Palace or Dread Fortress storyline. So this is Dread Palace. This is probably my favorite operation in the game, is Dread Palace. Here you fight Dreadmaster Brontes, Dreadmaster Tyrants, Dreadmaster Calpheus, Dreadmaster Raptus, and then Kappa.
You mean Bestia?
That's true. Bestia. And Kappa with Council. So, we consider Tyrants to be pretty hard, right? Tyrants is hard.
I mean, hard is relative at this point, but I'd say out of like, I did kind of a quick rankings of all the first 26 Nim bosses, just like to see where I thought they would fall. And Tyrants was one of the highest non-Apex bosses.
Yes. What makes Tyrants so difficult is you basically have to play you have to play Break the Ice while DPSing. So, one of the things that I love most about Dread Palace is the fact that every single boss in there has a mechanic or has an environment that matches to them. So with Bestia being the master of the beast, the dread, it's all about ads. For Tyrants, he is the master of stratagem. So, it's about strategically dropping the tiles in the fight. For Calpheus, he is the master of
Time.
So you have the past, the present, and the future phases that you have to go into. Raptus is
Dick.
Raptus is the god of madness.
He's kind of the unofficial leader, though. So
Yeah.
each one challenges. Like, it's supposed to be the challenge of the roles. Like how good are his enemies? Are you good enough to face kind of the unofficial leader?
Unofficial leader. And then Council is the culmination of all of them. So I'm especially looking forward to Dread Palace. I was so excited to get my Dreadmaster title, which I got just 2 months ago. There was a title that I had been fighting over for about 4 years. So it was super exciting to get that title, and one of the ones I looked forward to the most. So moving on, so that with the ending of Dread Palace, you end what we consider to be the Dreadmaster storyline. So that starts on Belsavis, the Imperial and the Republic planetary storyline of Belsavis. It continues into Eternity Vault, KP, EC, TFB, SMV, Dread Fortress, and ends in Dread Palace. So with the release of 3.0, that brought us to the very next tier of operations, which
Space
are
Pirates.
Space Pirates, indeed.
I will say, if you did enjoy the storyline for the Dreadmasters, don't worry, I'm sure they'll come back in 7.0.
Yes, as long as they bring Kephis, right?
Exactly.
Before we move on, we have a very funny story, me and Bishop, about doing Tyrants and Nim with all melee, and the madness that ensued.
And we have a story about Dread Fortress too that's related to Elseforce.
I completely skipped that story.
Well, while we're heading over to Rishi, tell us the story about Dread Fortress.
So, same person, Elsha. We were doing Brontes one time, and so what happens in that fight is in hard mode. This happens only because in Odd Nightmare it happens for additional portions. But from the four corners of the area, you get these energy spheres that small. They tether themselves to 1 DPS and they start stacking. They cannot be damaged in any way normally. Well, they can technically be damaged, but you can't really kill them. The way you deal with them is you run into them. But the fewer stacks they have, the more damage they do. So, if you run into one with 5 or 6 stacks, you're going to die unless you have a hard cooldown up. If you run into it 17 or 18 stacks, you'll take probably 30k damage. However, if you let it get to 20 stacks, it blows up and does damage to everybody in the group. In hard mode, this only happens in the phase with Brontes and Kephis, and during the phase with the 2 hands and 6 fingers. In Nim, it additionally happens at the very beginning, and it happens during the final burn. And that's, by the way, one of the things that makes Nim so difficult, which we'll talk about later, but that's just, it means that you don't have tanks to deal with the boss, and that just makes it a lot harder. Anyway, so we were doing DF Nim at one point, and Elle was dealing with Kefis in the Bronte's Kefis phase, and Kefis spawns, and there's an orb that spawns too, kind of near Kefis. Now, normally what she does is she tabs Kefis and force pulls him to get threat on him, and then Phantom strides over and just kind of carries on. This time, however, she tabbed to the orb that
no!
pulls it into the group, and it kills 5 people.
That's amazing.
Can we not do that? Oh my god. That's like my favorite line.
Hold on a second.
Can we not do that? That's fantastic.
No, Kat's delivery of it was beautiful. Like,
It was.
And Ellis, again, is just like, what?
Like,
what do you-
what that happened? Didn't even realize it. I went back on her stream, and I'm like, Al.
Force pulls on cooldown. I'm at Kefis. It can't have been me.
There was a similar story. I mean, there's been through the years lots of similar memes from other people. There's another tank, I'm not going to say his name, but he was streaming and had a little, like, what? I don't understand why this isn't working, because he had popped his Force Shroud and ran into an orb and, like, keeps running through it over and over. This was about a year ago. And just kept running through it over and over and, like, ignoring his hand mechanic, because he's like, why isn't this popping? Yeah, he never taunted it.
That's amazing.
I think he force pulled it to him also. Long story short, I'm pretty sure because of the force pull and all that, it blew to 20.
That is fantastic. Lots of memes in Dread Fortress. Looking forward to that particular episode. But we are moving on to...
Oh, I got invited to the wrong group. Whoops.
Very cool. All right, so
Yeah.
we are moving on to 3.0 and the operations. We have the Ravagers. I think this is probably one of the least favorite operations as a whole.
It's probably the least done.
I would say it's like, yeah, it's the least done. And I don't really know why. Aside from Master Blaster being a little...
I mean, that's why.
That's pretty
That's
much
why.
why. That's pretty much why. Yeah, Master Blaster is very confusing, and it is not forgiving to heavy melee DPS compositions. So,
Not forgiving. It just literally doesn't let you do it.
I mean,
See,
you
I'm
can
trying to be
use the
nice
3
here.
melees. You can use the 3 melee spots and do it with 3 melee. It's been done. It's not what
It's
it's
been
not
done.
forgiving to is a lack of positional awareness.
Yes.
And, I mean, the fight isn't nearly what it used to be. Like, not even nearly. But it is the type of fight, I say this all the time, where if you run it in 16-man, it literally fractures relationships. Like, there are people that you, like, had respect for and could look in the face, and then after that, you're like, I could never play with them again. It's that type of fight.
it is. Master Blaster is very... you have
It's
to...
just not designed well for 16-man is the thing.
Yeah, that is very true. So Ravagers there is no real tie-in. So Ravagers doesn't really have a story leading up to it, aside from just being on Rishi during the Shadow of Revan storyline.
I mean, I think there is a tie-in in terms of, like, the Ravagers are supposed to be, like, helping supply the Revanite stuff. But,
Yes.
Like, it's
Oh,
never really
yeah.
explained.
Yeah, but it's not like the Dreadmaster story arc where every single operation leading up into Dread Palace, ties into each other. The Ravagers is a little bit of a standalone. It's located here on Rishi. It's one of those ones you have to leave the fleet for, which is a bummer because everybody loves fleet chat. So it's located right here. The story mission is located right next to it. You can't miss it. It's just this little box right here. So, I like Ravagers, actually. I really don't mind the Ravagers fight, but... the Ravagers as a whole, but I do understand why it's not exactly the most well-known, well-ran
Yeah,
op
I
in
mean,
the
it
game.
really came down to when it came out, it was all about your level. To like, my group had some very, very good success on Master Blaster, so that made Operation more tolerable. But there were a lot of people, a lot of groups that were stuck on it for months, and at a certain point, it makes you lose interest.
Yes.
But there are funny stories to come out of it. The first 16-man, not the first 16-man clear, but one of the first 16-man clears on the Harbinger server was done by the group having half of the DPS / stucking at the beginning of the fight. Or beforehand, like they would stay dead. Sorry, they would actually stay dead from the previous pull, I believe, and then would be rezzed. But they wouldn't take the res. I don't remember exactly how it was done. Whatever it was, they wouldn't take their res until the second phase started, so that the group didn't have to deal with the additional circles. So they would literally they literally did the first phase with a whole bunch of people dead on the ground, and then they all rezzed to start the next phase.
That is amazing.
Who did that?
I'm not saying.
I see.
I'm not using a stream to call people out.
Yep.
I'm not using.
Yeah,
We're not
yeah,
gonna
I
call.
can
We're
see.
not calling anybody out. So moving
I see
on.
how that works. Is like if they're just dead and you give them a res, it stays for 10 minutes.
That's true. That is true. So moving on, we are going into Temple of Sacrifice. It is located on Yavin, right here. It's at the very end. Temple ruins here. Now, Temple of Sacrifice is the culmination of the Shadow of Revan storyline. You can get the operation storyline by completing the Shadow of Revan Yavin 4 story. There's usually two options when you're finally at that endpoint. You can either go into the operation and kill Revan that way, or go do a whole bunch of dailies and then come back and do the solo Revan fight. And I know a majority of people actually end up doing the solo Revan fight after doing the dailies. So Temple of Sacrifice and Ravagers do not have nightmare difficulties or master mode difficulties. They are considered hardmare. So Revan, how difficult do you think the Revan fight is? I remember when it first dropped in 3.0, it was rough. It was very rough.
All of the checks have been removed. The first floor at tier was an actual heal check. There was damage going out, getting through HK. There was lots of damage. There was some position-based stuff, but it was more about heal check and pushing him in a reasonable amount of time. So there was some DPS check, some heal check. That's all been completely removed from the game at this point. That was removed essentially with the 4.0 release. It was really toned down. I wouldn't call it a hardmare anymore. However, the mechanic of dealing with aberration. Sorry?
I think the main thing is also because of how over-geared we are relative to the content.
Well, sure, but I mean, if you went in 2/3, like, that's now, I'm saying, like, at the start of each of the 4.0 and 5.0 tiers, it was tuned down. It wasn't tuned towards the highest tiers of gear at release of those patches. It was tuned.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a, a hard mare anymore. It was hard mode. So the mechanic on the third floor of aberrations and facing and clock phase, I mean, that's still... Look, not only is it still very dependent on having a good caller or knowing how to read the circles yourself very well, you will still see very capable groups that have farmed it for years. Right now, people have become a bit reliant on a timer from StarParse, the parsing software that most of us use. And if a tank hits him while he's in his shield, then the timer starts and it throws all the timers off for pushes and pulls.
The timer even works anymore.
It does if you have a tank not touch him while he's in his shield, it actually functions perfully. But that's what starts the timer.
Oh, it was fixed? Did it, I had no restraints on what I did.
Okay, so they did an update to StarParse last month where they added timers for Nim and fixed some things, so maybe it was fixed. That could be the case. But regardless, you were still seeing groups kind of wiping to push and pulls based on not having their timer because a lot of us use it as a crutch. But that is the one thing. That's the mechanic where people have to prog and learn and understand basically like the happy feet scenario where you kind of want to keep your feet moving in order to update your position because again, this engine, and you'll see it a lot, you'll see it in Tithe, you'll see it in quite a few instances, the way that this game functions, updating position isn't its strong suit. I'll put it like that.
That's why a lot of people recommend you jump to reset basically the server.
Yeah. I prefer strafing to jumping because strafing works just as well, and unfortunately with jumping you are taking the chance that something physics related can happen to you, as you'll see on Tithe. I mean, we'll get there, but on Tithe, if you jump during an inversion, you actually get thrown like substantially further than if you had not jumped.
I did not know that. That is very interesting. So yeah, so strafing or jumping, and strafing is moving left to right instead of forwards and backwards.
You can move in any direction. I mean, forwards, backwards, left, whatever you want to do. We did left, right because it was what we liked to do at tier, like while Revan was occurring. But you know, I think I can think of someone from Zors who would use his mouse buttons to continuously move. There's different ways to accomplish
Yeah,
it.
there's different ways, but you know, strafing is just not moving in a straight line. Strafing is moving to the side rather than in a straight line. At its base core. So now we have wrapped up Shadow of Revan 3.0, and now we currently have 2 more operations in the game. It's called Gods from the Machine.
What's the last one?
It is the last one. I'm talking more about. I talking more about the instance bosses. But Gods from the Machine is the latest operation in the game. This features how many bosses? 5?
Yeah.
5 bosses. The Nightmare difficulty or Master Mode difficulty was just recently released in the month of December. So Gods of the Machine is very. How would you consider Gods from the Machine to be? Is it very mechanic heavy? Is it very
Trash heavy.
trash heavy?
Oops, I went in.
He's not wrong, but it's both mechanic heavy and check heavy. So
I think out of the 5 fights, there's only one fight that's like really DPS check.
no, Isaac's is too.
Isaac's. Cool. So people are still progging on Nightmare Gods. How many guilds do we know or teams have killed Nightmare Isaacs?
3.
3 teams have killed Nightmare Isaacs.
Okay, it's farming components, failure, emerald, and origin, right? It has Team Mango.
So 3 Isaacs kills and 1 timed kill.
Well, not 3 kills. Like farming components has killed them a number of times, but
Right, but 3 teams have cleared it.
Yeah.
Yep. Origin, I'm getting told. Origin's Team Mango
Origin is
raid 1 hour a week. Gotcha. So it's a hard. I would say it's probably one of the more difficult.
it's by far the most difficult.
It is
It's like,
the-
no question.
DP Nim was day 1. Like that thing
Yeah,
was
that's true.
done and over with. I remember checking. I think there were a lot of bugs with getting into the instance of DP Nim when it came out, and but I checked back a couple hours later, and it's like, yeah, we've cleared it.
Listen, this isn't a slam by any means. Like it's not a slight, but there was definitely more PTS time with functioning bosses on the PTS as well.
Yeah, functioning, fair enough. But even
So-
the ones that were functioning on PTS for God are they're still giving people trouble.
There are still giving people trouble. So
I mean, like Hunt, literally, you could only do half the fight, and then barely anybody got to Skybug because the Hunt was so ridiculously hard on PTS, and nobody even saw Isaac.
wow. So Gods is still in progression. Gods is the culmination of the Iocath storyline, which is the story/planet that follows after Knights of the Fallen Empire and Knights of the Eternal Throne. So it goes Kotfi, Kotet, and then it goes into Iocath, and then Traitor Among the Chiss storyline, and that all ends with moving on to Osis. So those are the full-length operations that are currently in the game right now. There are 3 instanced operations.
Well, if you count the event boss, there's
I'm not counting event bosses. These are the ones that you can go into regularly. Taboro's Courtyard, which is located on the planet Makeb. Colossal Monolith. Yes, Gods also ties in with the Heralds of Zildrog on Zakul. That is correct. So,
Who knows that? Thank you, Pleble.
thank you, Pleble.
Yeah, well,
Very
it
cool.
actually ties into the story in multiple ways.
That's true. That is very true. So there are 3
which I
one-man
never
or one.
explained explicitly, but
We'll talk about it more when we focus on Gods and all of that good stuff. So, Taboro's Courtyard. That was launched in 2.0 with the Dreadmaster story arc. That was, it's not tied into the Makeb storyline similar to like Temple of Sacrifice is with Revan. However, Taboro's Courtyard is a 1 boss, instance boss raid. Story mode is very easy. We'll talk about it a little bit more. It is located, as said, on the planet Makeb, which is this way. So, Taboro's Courtyard really isn't run. It used to be run a lot because it dropped Underworld gear in the hard mode variant. And also, the 3 instance bosses also do not have nightmare difficulties as of this moment. Taboro's Courtyard has never had a nightmare difficulty, and Colossal Monolith has never had a nightmare difficulty. Anybody have any interesting stories about Taboro's Courtyard or Colossal Monolith?
I actually ran it last week with, Paramount has a lot of different levels of raiding groups, and one of them is like a learning group, and so they were, still running through old content. They ran it through last week. It's not, there's not much happening in that fight right now.
No.
It still drops the PMP speeder, the pimp speeder part, so
Yes,
that's
it
still
does.
around the game.
So not a lot of people run TC. Taboro's Courtyard is labeled as TC. Colossal Monolith is labeled as CM, if I remember correctly. And then Hive Queen is the newest instance boss in the game, and so people are still actively running that. So Taboro's Courtyard can be located here on Makeb. I'm actually heading that way right now. And while we're, showing the locations of Colossal Monolith on Ziost, Hive Queen on Osis, and Taboro's Courtyard, let's move on. Let's move on to talk about classes. I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit more about class rankings, like where do you put specific classes of DPS, of tanks? What is your hardest? What is considered the easiest? So talk to me a little bit about tanks, for instance. What are your class strengths and weaknesses in tanks? So that's Power Tech / Vanguard, Shadow / Assassin, and Juggernaut / Guardian. So, Bishop, what do you consider some of the strengths, and what do you consider some of the weaknesses of those tanks?
That's a better question than
I don't think rankings is really even so.
Rankings is the wrong word.
It's so subjective, and it depends on the context.
Absolutely. But going from there, I'll say this right now: assassin tanks are those are going to be the tanks you see the most. I found most people right now when they get into tanking try assassin.
Okay.
Thing with assassin right now is far and away phasing phantasm. That utility in the masterful tier, whatever it's called, or legendary, I think actually. 60% absorption of all incoming damage for 2.5 seconds. Every 15 seconds, which is really more like every 12.5. It's kind of absurd, quite frankly. We've never seen something so spammable, I dare say, and so easily mitigatable of mechanics. I mean, other class, the Power Tech or the Vanguard, or I'm sorry, the Power Tech or the Juggernaut, we have abilities like Mad Dash, which is a 45-second cooldown, which is pretty comparable to Phasing Phantasm in terms of dealing with one big hit. It's not at all on the same level, though.
Okay.
So Assassin right now has the strength of, besides that, they have the highest internal elemental damage reduction based on their depredating bolts, the 4 stacks that they get from that. They have a higher defense chance than the other 2 tanks at base due to the Inquisitor bonus. Their shield chance with Dark Ward is way higher than the other 2 tanks, and that is a major strength. That makes up for the fact that they have the lowest, kinetic energy damage reduction. The fact that they can be shielding more than the other tanks, that really where they shine is their stacks. So they have the stacks of Dark Ward, which increase their shield chance, and they have the stacks of Dark Protection, which increase their damage reduction. Secondary to Dark Ward is Dark Bulwark, which increases your absorption 1% per stack up to 10. So if you really want to gauge an assassin tank, you gauge them at peak mitigation, which is with Dark Ward and 10 stacks of Dark Bulwark and 4 stacks of Dark Protection. And they're very strong. They're going to be really good at mitigating any sort of mitigatable damage. So all white damage and any, force tech attack that is kinetic energy, they'll be shielding that more than the other tanks will.
What is considered white damage?
White damage is basically a weapon attack.
Okay.
So, anybody swinging their lightsaber at you is usually going to be a white damage hit, or shooting a gun basic attack at you is a white damage hit. It's a lot easier, honestly, to put it in terms of PvP.
Okay.
So, or class-wise. So a marksman sniper, for instance, is heavy white damage. Penetrating blast, ambush, snipe, follow through. Those are all white. I think the only thing that really you would consider, not white damage would be corrosive dart and orbital strike, frag grenade, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for the most part, it's white damage. So marksman snipers are kind of fun for me to go against when I'm tanking because I have like a bunch of tools for dealing with, as opposed to a dot class, which is going to be more internal elemental. A lot of the dots are internal. You cannot shield or, in any sense of, active mitigation, you can't really mitigate.
The only thing that
those
works
attacks.
is like straight up damage reduction. They don't
Exactly.
They don't respond to defense or well, they respond like force deck resist, but that's kind of a separate thing entirely.
Quick pause. Just wanted to let stream know this is the location for Colossal Monolith, also known as CM. It's located here on Ziost. You go to the Fractured Track entrance, located after you completed the Ziost storyline. Continue.
Don't forget. I will add. Don't forget that you have to kill the other monolith first.
If you're doing it in hard, yeah. All right. So you've talked a little bit about assassins, shadow tanks, and Juggernaut/Guardian tanks. There's not a lot of power tech / Vanguard tanks out there.
Hold on, I got way more to go through.
Okay, go for it.
Way more.
Yeah.
So aside from that, the assassins also shine. Here is one thing I really want to delve into real quick. A lot of people look at Juggernaut Guardian as the cooldown tank, and quite frankly, that's pretty outdated.
Okay.
Assassins have, in my opinion, the same amount, if not more, ways to run their cooldown. So Overcharged Saber is better than Invincible. Deflection, not as good as Sabre Ward for a couple reasons, but there are some cases where Mounting Darkness is very, it's something. So, I would, obviously those two are comparable. Force Shroud, in my opinion, in terms of dealing with tank mechanics, not in terms of tank DPS, Force Shroud is better than Saber Reflect. What?
The only thing that, more comfortable to Shroud, honestly, is Mad Dash, to be honest.
I was going to compare Mad Dash to Stealth Shroud. That's the way I view it. I view those more as situational.
Yeah.
So yeah, Mad Dash and Stealth Shroud you have to be smarter with those two abilities than you do with Shroud and Saber Reflect. And you have to know the mechanics of the fight enough to know that Stealth Shroud is going to be a good thing to use or not. You have to know where you're angled and where you're positioned to Mad Dash or not. In my opinion, those two are more comparable. Enraged Defense is, in my opinion, comparable to Recklessness in terms of it's good at dealing with a bunch of small hit. It's not going to save you from one big hit, in the sense that if you shield with Recklessness or without, it doesn't matter. You're shielding. That's the big thing you're doing. Same with Enraged Defense. Healing yourself for 12k on a 120k hit is not that big of a deal. So Recklessness and Enraged Defense are comparable. And here's the biggest disparity. In terms of dealing with one big hit, you have Endure Pain on Juggernauts is kind of like I don't have anything for active mitigation, but I can just Endure Pain and kind of hope for the best, Force Scream, Crushing Blow, get my DR. But that's where I would put Sins with Phasing Phantasm. And that really, in my opinion, outshines the way that a tank can deal with a big hit mechanic without blowing anything major. Where we have to Mad Dash, or quite frankly on a Power Tech Pop Energy Shield to deal with this, they can just use Force Speed. And that is a major strength for the Assassin tank right now. Not to mention the fact that with Stealth, they can reset their med pack, which the other two tanks can't do. So that's a nice little bonus that they have. They can also Stealth Res, though that's a little harder for a tank to do, given they actually usually have to be doing stuff.
You would think.
That is one thing that I feel like people need to consider if they say Juggernaut is the cooldown tank. Not really. Assassin is in every way they can stack against them.
To be honest, the way I feel with the tanks is Assassin is the best against against a damage profile. They will take on average the least amount of damage, but unless you actively manage the cooldowns correctly, they will take huge spikes that the other tanks will.
They will. That tends to be due to their light armor. They're less damage. If you get a bad shield or defense roll on a Sin, it hurts way more than a Juggernaut Guardian or Power Tech. Another weakness of the Sin is that they, I haven't really looked at Power Tech, but I know for a fact. I am fairly confident that Sin is the lowest tank DPS.
Okay.
Yeah,
Power
that's
Tech.
definitely true.
Yeah, well, some. I can squeeze out some depending on the situation. I might send a lot more. But they are the lowest tank DPS of the three, without a doubt. So that's one weakness. Although in this day and age, it's not as important. Aside from gods. Another weakness, in my opinion, is their Phantom Stride. I find that to be a major weakness because I think it's less reliable in every way than Force Charge and Jet Charge. I find that on a Juggernaut, I can control where I am far better than I can on a Sin, in the sense that I have Charge, Force Push to reset that, Charge again, or I can intercede to somebody. I can Mad Dash where I need to be, which Force Speed can do the same.
Also, one thing that makes Phantom Stride worse than Jet Charge or Force Charge is that Phantom Stride, like, it's a quickly move to your destination, whereas as far as the game is concerned, either Jet Charge or Force Charge are considered teleports. Like, you essentially, your position doesn't like move like smoothly; it discreetly jumps.
It's considered
So, like,
desync.
So basically, like, if there's something that you have to get like across in order to get to where you want to go, you can do that with Jet Charge or Force Sleep, but you cannot do that with
Phantom Stride, especially in terms of getting up. Like if
That's
there's
true.
an angle, like on snipers for Thrash, that's a big pain.
Quick
Another
pause.
issue-
Quick
oh, sorry.
pause. This is the location of the newest instance boss, which is Hive of the Mountain Queen. It's located here on Osis, very close to the bug boss, world boss. All right, so those are the locations of all of the operations and their story modes. Let's continue about tanks.
One issue though with that too is Jet Charge is really unreliable. It teleports you to your same position a lot of the time. It'll go on cooldown, you won't go anywhere. But hey, at least you have 2 free flame bursts, right?
Flame burst.
But yeah, Assassin in that sense is it's a good tank to get into. If you're good at managing your Dark Ward and your Dark Protection, which lays out very clearly for you in a 12-second rotation, and it has a lot of strengths. If you can manage the stacks, you can Sin tank pretty well. I was gonna say something else, I can't remember it. But moving on to Juggernaut Guardian, which is my personal favorite. Oh yeah, I want to say this real quick as an overview for tanking in general, though. The biggest thing is if you know the damage profile and the rhythm of the fight, it doesn't really matter what tank you're on because you know what's coming and how to deal with it. And you're not going to blow anything that you might need later. Like on a power tech, you have to be a little more conservative with the way you blow everything because, hey, it's like, I don't have energy shield for this big mechanic because I used it earlier. Well, you're screwed.
So you wouldn't necessarily say tanking is about stats and classes, but
no. Tanking, whereas I said earlier, DPS and healers, you have very specific thresholds like Galactic thresholds to hit, crit, DR. Tanking, you have such a generous... Yeah, after a very generous threshold, you have a lot of room to work. A lot of tanks are running, 600-700 crit right now. That is the point. Tank stats become very, minuscule very quickly. And if you know the damage profile of the fight and you know your cooldowns respectively for those damage and for those attacks, there's a lot of things you can circumvent that everybody stresses over with tank gearing. It doesn't have to happen. Now, personally, I'm in favor of more. I'm not running that much crit. I am running the full lethal mod, and I'm running 140k health on my Juggernaut at the moment with the blue stem. But I'm not worried about crit necessarily. But I could do it if I really wanted to. I have no doubt that I could switch to more crit and do everything that I'm doing right now. It's because damage profiles are the number one thing in my opinion to tanking. If you know the damage and you know the rhythm of the fight, what you do changes entirely. You're not sitting there at the mercy of the fight. You're the one controlling it, and that's the entire point of tanking. So,
I think
yeah.
Positioning is also really equally important.
One of the big things that tanks have to deal with as a whole is positioning of the boss, positioning of certain mechanics. And so, would you consider tanking to be the most mechanical / fight knowledge heavy of all three roles?
Absolutely. I feel like that if you know things from a tank perspective, it's very easy for me to heal or DPS after seeing things because while I'm tanking, I also pay attention to what DPS can do or have to do. But the thing about DPS and healers, especially healers, is your main job doesn't change that much. Healers need to heal. There's always damage going out, except for like shield phases on Bronte. But even then, healers, they're always using their heals. There's not much else to it. Very rarely does a healer have to deal with a mechanic. DPS more so than healer, but tanks, the point is you have to meet a DPS check. You have to be healed enough. Tanks, you have to not freaking die. All right, but you have to do the mechanics too, and that definitely means that a tank should and is responsible for dealing with a lot more mechanics.
A lot more mechanics.
Yeah, while everybody's DPSing the walker, you're over there dealing with cap. How are you dealing with it is up to you. Do you want to stack him on the walker for everybody to dodge spread or get more damage? Sure. Are you going to kite him the whole time? Are you just going to face tank? It's up to you to decide how you're going to be dealing with it. Whereas everybody else is constrained to, I have to meet this DPS check.
Yes, that's true.
So in that sense, yeah, they're definitely more mechanic heavy, and I think that's how it should be. I think if there was like a DTPS check in the sense that everybody must be below 5k on Nephra or we wipe, that'd be ridiculous.
That'd be awful. That sounds awful.
Well, yeah, you get my point.
Yeah, I do get your point.
So
let's actually segue that. That's awesome. Thank you so much. That's a great breakdown. Let's
Juggernaut.
Okay, talk a little.
Come back if we want to.
We're gonna talk a little bit more in depth about each of the classes a little bit later. So, we're gonna talk. Let's segue into healing. So, Tom, what do you think are the current class strengths and weaknesses of Sorc/Sage, Operative/Scoundrel, and Merc/Commando healers?
I mean, as far as strengths of the healers, they're all pretty much around the same. They each have their own little niche of what they can do. Like Merc is very bursty, but the burst is limited by your supercharged gas. Operative is very much an AoE healer with HOTS and maintaining the raid. Sorc sits in between them with it has the burst, but it's lower than the Merc, but it's very consistent. But as far as, like, which one's better, which one would you rather take? No, we're only taking double Sorc because bubbles. There shouldn't be anything like that. You can take an Operative into a raid and a Merc into a raid, and you can take... I've been on plenty of teams where it's just like Merc Operative healer or Operative Sorc or Sorc Merc. It's like the combinations are always good. I mean,
I think the only combination that really has any major weaknesses is double Operative, just because you have fairly low burst potential, unless both really know how to set it up.
I'm sure that double Operative can be pretty strong.
Well, I mean,
yeah, I agree.
If everyone's probed, that's like
6k
heals. That's 6k heals every 3 seconds on everybody if they're maintaining probes on all 8 people. And if you're taking more than that, it's like, we need to talk about what fire you're sitting in.
There are some fights though, like that force you to take lots of extra damage. But no, I know what you mean. I get what you're I just think, like, in terms of playability, double Operative is the hardest to pull off.
Hardest to pull off correctly, hardest to pull off well, efficiently. It really requires... Yeah, it really requires both healers to know how to play their class, how to, as you said, set up burst healing correctly, the positions of the Culto waves, so that is probably considered the hardest healing comp to play effectively.
I don't know. As a Sorc, it kind of pisses me off every time I go to bubble someone and the other healer's already done it.
I mean, as a Sorc, Lightning Sorc, I've taken the talent where, I get, the lightning barrier. So I'm not going to ask you to bubble me. I'm going to bubble myself for that extra DPS. But I do understand what that can irritate you.
Oh, Zab. Poor Zab.
Zab and Cortel.
Zab and Cortel. It's just like, they main Sorc DPS, and it's like, I feel bad for them if they have a Sorc healer, because they have to constantly tell them, don't bubble me.
Don't bubble me!
We're going into Bronte's burn. Cortel's like, really? It's like, I already know what happened. Cat's like, my bad. Thank you, Cat.
I mean, that is pretty much the anthem of Sorcs. and why like Sorc DPS hate Sorc healers. It's like, you're stealing my DPS.
You're stealing my DPS.
I'm working hard here to put out as much as I can, and you're stealing it.
Well, this is a great segue into actually talking about DPS. Sorc and Splizza, what would you consider the strengths and weaknesses of, let's start with melee DPS. So that's going to be Marauders / Sentinels, Guardians / Juggernauts, Operatives / Scoundrels, Power Tech / Vanguards, Assassins / Shadows. So what do you think are the current strengths and weaknesses of those classes?
That's a lot to talk about.
Well, let's just do a general overview for right now.
No pushback.
Honestly, yeah, I think the main, I guess I'll just talk a little bit about melee as a whole versus range as a whole. So BioWare did this thing relatively early on in 5.0 where they said, oh, melee DPS have it harder, so they should have a higher DPS target to compensate, which if you've played this game at all, you know that isn't really actually true, but it's what BioWare decided. So one of the main advantages of melee DPS is a higher overall DPS potential than range DPS. It's just how the game is programmed. There's no like other reason to it other than like that's just what BioWare decided to do. Again, I don't think it's right, but it's what it is. Another thing is aside from assassin tanks, melee classes have no channels or casted abilities, which thereby leads to both higher mobility, immunity against ability pushback, which happens to ranged, which we can talk about a little bit more in depth at a different time. And in general, that means like it's easier to like either change targets or like execute a mechanic at the same time because you can move while you're doing your rotation. Whereas for every single range DPS, there is a point in your rotation where you have to stop moving entirely in order to cast an ability that's part of your rotation. Otherwise, like you're going to lose something that's really major by doing that. I'd say the one real drawback about melee, and this is a minor drawback because like if you know what you're doing, it doesn't really matter that much, but is the fact that you have a much more limited area that you can stand in to be able to hit the boss.
That's true.
So like this can lead to some problems on a few fights, but in general, like there's always a way to maintain uptime without like having to stand in fire.
So where would you consider, out of all of the current melee classes in the game, what would you consider to be the most hardest to learn how to play effectively versus the easiest to learn how to play effectively? Like where would you put, like if you were setting up a raid team and you're going into gods, what are you, let's not talk about gods. Let's talk about like any of the non-gods class, non-operations. What would, if you were putting together a group, what type of melee DPS would you want and why?
I would want a Marauder and a Power Tech.
Why would you want specifically a Marauder and a Power Tech?
So I guess I can talk about each of the classes individually. So Marauder, because they bring a lot of unique things to the table that just you can't get anywhere else.
Bloodthirst is the biggest
Bloodthirst, yeah, Bloodthirst is like amazing for any type of burst DPS check. It's a flat 10% increase to all damage done for 10 seconds, which is not something you can match on any other class. It's really, really nice. Predation is incredibly useful for positioning because it's a 60% with utility percent speed increase, and it removes all movement impairing effects from the group when activated.
Yes.
Which is just like it helps so much for lots of different phases. Additionally, Marauders have like some of the best survivability in the game against mechanics. They have built-in AoE DR with the utility hardened defense. That's what it's called, right? I don't remember. They also have some really strong defensive cooldowns. They have Cloak of Pain, which you can get against like a standard like a constant damage profile. You can get about 80% uptime, and it is a flat 30% reduction in damage taken, plus any damage you take, a little bit of it gets reflected back to the attacker. Sabre Ward is the same cooldown that Juggernauts have. It's like 50% increase to defense and 25% damage reduction against force tech attack. They have Undying Rage, which is 99% less damage taken for 3 seconds, or if you take the utility, which is not all that useful most of the time, but if you take the utility, it's fine. They also can Mad Dash to ignore mechanics, and they have Force Camouflage, which is, while you're in it, it's a 50% reduction to damage you take. So really high survivability, lots of utility. Also, they have 2 of the highest parsing specs in the game are Marauder specs. Those are Annihilation and Fury, and they have, in my opinion, one of the best burst specs in the game in Carnage. It is not the highest though, because the Power Tech has the highest in Advanced Prototype.
That is true. I know that I leveled my Marauder as Carnage, and I don't know how to play anything else, which is why I don't play Marauder.
Yeah. Anyway, so for Power Techs, they also bring a bunch of unique things to the table. The biggest probably being Sonic Rebounder, which is it is a utility that you can take that on your Sonic Missile. It gives all allies within range 1 stack of Sonic Rebounders, which basically functions similar to Saber Reflect, or for Mercs, it's not Echoing Deterrent, Responsive Safeguard. Where it reflects that attack back to the attacker and completely negates it on the person taking it. It actually applies to more attacks than either of those abilities, which is really odd. So, but you can use that to either mitigate mechanics or at the same time, since significantly help meeting a DPS check, because I'll just use Revan for an example.
Revan.
He does a mechanic called Heave, which hits everybody in the group with a 25k hit. If everybody has a Sonic Rebounder for that, they do instead 150k damage to the boss with that ability.
One of my favorite rebounders, or affectionately known as Riris, stories is Riris is on Nightmare Council on the Styrak phase in Brontes and Styrak, where we had 2 Power Techs. They used 1 rebounder after the other, and Styrak was gone in 2 rebounders.
Yep. They also, the other thing is, Advanced Prototype is, I think it's the highest parsing. It's one of the highest parsing specs that provides the armor debuff.
Yep.
The highest parsing is Vengeance, but we can talk more about Jugs when we get to that. But AP also has the highest burst potential of any spec in the game, by a considerable distance, actually. You can get probably an 18 to 20k DPS over the course of about 10 to 15 seconds out of AP, and that just cannot be matched by any other spec.
No.
Which helps enormously for meeting any type of burst DPS check. And if you combine that with Bloodthirst, even more so.
Indeed.
The other thing Power Techs have is they have Hydraulic Overrides, which is something the Mercs have too, but they get better Hydros with utilities that can make you move faster, and they get them more frequently.
And longer.
Yeah. Am I forgetting anything particular with Power Techs?
I mean, and we can talk more about Power Tech utilities and stuff like that a little bit later on down the line. So, aside from
Power, also have decent survival. Everybody says Power Techs have bad survivability. It's really not that true, because they have built-in AoE DR, which a lot of classes do not have built-in AoE DR.
Close and personal.
Given they don't, and up close and personal, which is similar to Cloak of Pain in that it does damage to the attacker that when you take damage. However, for Power Techs, it is something that is innate to the class. It is not a cooldown, so it is something that's always active. And there are a couple of fights where that helps a lot on.
Okay. So what about Operatives and Assassins and Juggernauts? Why did you immediately go to Marauder? Aside from those classes that you talked, aside from those specific things that they bring to the table, would you bring an Operative? Would you bring an Assassin? Would you bring a Juggernaut?
I mean, they wouldn't be my first choice for the reasons I just outlined in, it's not necessarily that they bring anything bad to the table, it's that Marauders and Power Techs bring more that's good to the table.
Gotcha.
And if you were to have to choose between classes, if you were given one person of each class that is equal skill, they're all equally good, you would pick the Power Tech and the Marauder, or at least I would pick the Power Tech and the Marauder for those reasons.
For those
Not
reasons.
because not for skill reasons, but because they bring more that's going to be helpful to the table.
Gotcha. So we talked a little bit about melee, and we'll talk more about melee over the course of these mini-series, but let's talk about ranged swords and Splizza. Splizza, you main Merc, correct? That's what you currently play?
Yeah.
Okay.
I currently play Merc for the most
Okay,
part.
so let's talk a little bit about ranged DPS classes. What do you consider to be the current strengths and the current weaknesses of Sorc DPS, Merc DPS, Sorc Sage, Merc Commando, Sniper / Gunslinger?
So I mean, there's not too much to. I will say that over the years the cooldown, the DCDs on Sorcs have greatly. There was a point in time where they were just pure squish, pure clothies, and did not have great survivability. But over the years, they've been given cooldowns, especially through utilities that they can select, like Cloud Mind and Unnatural Prez, things like that. So their survivability has definitely improved through the years. They got this really nifty ability called Phase Walk, which is just great.
Assassins had it first. Let's just be clear. Assassins had it first.
They love being reminded about that. So they've improved throughout the years. Another strength, especially from Madness, is like native to the rotation, the ability to spread your dots without actually changing your rotation or adding anything into your rotation to change it. Snipers have the same thing with Viru. It's built into the rotation.
Engineering also has lots of inherent AoE, but not dot spread.
Not dot spread, and same for Lightning. Great AoE, but it's not a dot spread. It's like an upfront burst.
It's in a burst. It's more of a burst class.
Yeah.
Okay.
But aside from that, when it comes to Sorc, if you're talking at a super high level, like I am a firm believer that you can bring anything into anything, depending on what the rest of your group is. You could bring anything into anything. There just isn't all that much reason to bring a Sorc into, say, God's Nim. The thing with Madness, which is definitely my preferred class, is while it's got a higher damage potential, not by much, but it's got a higher damage potential. It is, I said earlier, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, and what I meant by that is that it's actually like people will meme and they're like, this is the easiest spec. Like, a TC thief used to be like red one, orange one, green one, purple, 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 purple. And like, there's your rotation, go. And like, you could do that. And especially now since they made because it used to be super 4-starved, especially in 4.0, like the spec was crazy 4-starved. It isn't anymore. At the same time, there's no reason to ever reapply dots before your dots are ready to fall off. Like, there's no world in where that's a DPS gain.
No.
So, in order to execute the rotation properly, it is a 7-segment. I mean, it's essentially static, but it's a 7-segment, 80-plus second rotation where your dots are shifting an application in each segment. So your dots are being reapplied in a different spot in each segment. So like when you're talking about a boss fight and where sometimes your targets are changing or whatever it is, it's substantially, it's very difficult to keep that rotation perfect and going throughout an entire encounter. And as soon as you lose it, your damage takes a bit of a hit. So, and the other problem is that there isn't a big enough delta in the damage between doing the potato rotation and doing the proper rotation.
Okay.
To where you're like, oh yeah, you definitely have to do, because neither are great. So it's just not worth playing. Not when you have snipers and Merc.
So I guess the same
I
question.
think Aro had a good quote a while ago that I saw on stream. He's like, playing Madness isn't that much fun if you're not killing bosses. Because if you kill bosses in Madness, it's like, yeah, I killed this in Madness. And if you wipe at 9%, it's like, well, maybe if I played a useful spec, we would have actually killed it. Not
Exactly.
Oh, snap.
It has its time and place. Like when God's Hard mode was top tier, you know, I immediately took a Madness Sorc into like Skiva and was top DPS in the group, like, you know, because there's a bunch of ads and I'm so like, it's just,
So that's
it
more
has its
fluffing.
time and place. Well, I mean, they needed to die. They did need to die, but yeah, it has its time and place. But its time and place was, you know, DP Nim at tier.
So I guess the same question. Yeah. So I guess the same question would be asked of you then. If you were creating a raid team, what range DPSs would you pick and why?
If I was taking 2 ranged DPS, I would take a Merc and a Sniper. I would take a Merc because, I mean, the damage output from IO is very good. They have great defensive cooldowns. Very mobile for the most part. And and a sniper is always great. Snipers, you know, give a raid-wide defensive, or I mean, depending on positioning. Sniper shields are still, after all these years, still one of the best defensive cooldowns in the game for raid.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Also,
So-
like, for snipers, it's just the 35-meter range is really helpful. They have
Lightning
great
has it
dot
as well.
spread. Well, yeah, but like you get that without having a low DPS potential.
Oh,
Correct.
you hurt my lightning Sorc main
Yeah.
heart.
It's true, though.
It
It's
is very true.
So you get that extra range. It definitely comes in handy.
Especially on like Tyrants, for instance. I have played.
Also-
Yeah.
You can roll every 20 seconds to completely mitigate a mechanic.
Roll is great. Entrench is still a terrific, terrific ability. So, I mean, they offer a lot in terms of, you know, what they can offer the raid group. They are like almost the ranged version of Amara in terms of they can really benefit the whole raid. You know, mercs are more of a little bit more of like a personal responsibility. Like you just have a lot of options in terms of defensives.
I think one of the big advantages of Merc over Sniper though is that in general target swapping is easier on Merc than it is on Sniper.
That's true.
Because like on Sniper if you're in Virulence, which you are going to be for the vast majority of fights, every time you swap targets, you have to apply your dots if you're going to hit it for more than like 10 seconds.
I hate that.
Whereas with Merc, you just don't have to do that.
I hate that. I hate that as a virulent sniper. It's like, oh, I've got to swap targets. Let me just reapply my dots, and it's dead.
Other thing to keep in mind, and another when you're forming these comps, and this is more of an overall statement, is, you know, like you put a let's say an assassin and a marauder together, and you know one is buffing the other's damage with a force buff, and then the other you put a PT and a merc or something, or you know merc is buffing range damage, etc., etc. So like you have to keep in mind also the different ways that classes can buff the other class's damage.
Gotcha. So one of the reasons to bring a Sorc, another one of the reasons to bring a Sorc, a Merc, and or an Operative, and aside from the Marauder, which we already talked about, is the class buffs, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on today. But Sorcs and Sages bring a buff that increases Mastery, Endurance, and Presence, because everybody knows you got to have Presence. Presence best stat.
I don't think class buffs really that much because you can, by doing the story, you get yourself. I think it's more the debuffs that they apply to their target is what the important thing to keep track of is.
Yes, that is true. So, and we'll talk more about debuffs such as armor debuffs, such as the force debuff, the tech debuff. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So we've talked a little bit about strengths and weaknesses of ranged and melee DPS, of tanks, and of healers. So let's go ahead and move forward into actually some of the things that are required when you're getting ready to start an operation or when you're getting ready to start doing 8-man content. Augmenting. I have had so many people ask, what is augmenting? How do I augment? How do I figure out how to augment correctly? So let's talk a little bit about augmenting, what the current tier of augmenting is, the augments that you can buy. So, augments, guys. Why would you consider augments to be such an important part of any role?
Tertiary stat is.
And what is a tertiary stat?
Well, your tertiary stats for DPS are alacrity, crit, and accuracy. There used to be a whole different tier of stats as well, but they've merged them all together. So, crit includes both crit chance and crit surge, which is the size of your crits.
I guess we can say what primary, secondary, and tertiary stats are, though.
Yes, let's talk about primary stats. Let's talk about tertiary stats. Let's talk about all of those good stuff. We're also going to talk a little bit about the economic impact of whether it's cheaper to buy or cheaper to build your augments. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But let's talk stats. So let's talk what's the difference between tertiary, primary, and secondary stats and why we need to augment them.
So primary stats, there's only one primary stat in the game. It's mastery now. There used to be more, but there's only one stat now. They did this as a whole thing when they simplified gear. I don't remember exactly when this happened, but they basically made it so that every class benefits from mastery, and you get that through gear just naturally. It's not really something you have to worry too much. But what it does is it increases your damage done as well as your percent chance to land a critical hit. Then endurance is also kind of a primary stat, but again, it's inherent to gear, so you don't have to worry. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It just affects how much HP you have. Your secondaries are different between tanks and DPS. For DPS, DPS and healers. For DPS and healers, it's power, and that just gives you a flat increase in healing and damage done. And for tanks, it's defense, which increases your chance to completely mitigate a melee or ranged attack.
Okay, so...
and then tertiary stats are all the other stats.
So that would be alacrity, what are those? Explain exactly what a tertiary stat is.
Tertiary stat is alacrity, crit, accuracy, shield, and absorb.
Okay. All right. So currently the top tier set of augments are the MK10 kits. You can either craft those with, I believe it is synth weaving, armor mech, or Armstech can craft the kits. Those require the MK10 components that you can get off of reverse engineering any of the level 600 crew skills. So like implants. Implants is a big thing for biochem. Biochem is a big source of the MK10 components, which I am showing up on the screen right now. Let me try and research that. So these are so it takes 10 components in order to make one kit. So currently, it's going to cost differently. So right now I'm on the Satil Sean server. So it looks like one, so that's, yeah. So biochem is a big source of components. Lots of people disenchant or reverse engineer the implants. Synth weaving is another one. Armor mech and Armstech. So any of like the actual physical crafting. And so those are the MK10 kits. You have 14 slots to fill to fully augment your character. So that's earpiece, 2 implants, 2 relics, your main hand, your offhand, and then the 7 pieces of armor. And you can augment those. It requires 1 augmentation kit. So, and then you find these item and modification stations. If you are a VIP holder, there is a location in the fleet, in the VIP section of the fleet. And I'll show you where they're, but they're also located in different segments of the fleet. They're located in the supply section, and they're located in the PvP section. It costs about 40k to augment a single piece of gear. There are 4 different rarities of augments, and so let's talk about why somebody would want the gold or the 240 augments over the, like, let's say the purple, the cheaper option, the 238. So why would somebody want to get the 240 augments over anything else?
Well, the 236 and the 240 augments have 3 tiers of stats, and the 228s only have 2. So, I mean, that right there definitely adds value. The 240s might be still overpriced in terms of the extra stats that you're getting out of them compared to 236, but that's really subjective on your.
The
Gets your
240
stats in the
augments are honestly like the price increase is just not worth it.
It's just not worth it. Okay.
They give you such a minuscule upgrade over 236, and they cost like twice as many material.
So like right now on Satil Sean, I searched on the GTN for accuracy augment 46, right? 3 million for one augment. But if you look at the let's say a critical augment 46, I think it is. Yeah, critical augment goes for 4.3 million. But if you look at the 45, which is the purple, that's a lot more expensive. What? My game's freaking out. Anyway.
So that purple is not a craftable. So that specific one is a rare drop from I think it's Anathema.
But still, like a purple critical augment 45 costs 42.9k in comparison to the gold or the 240 augment, which is 3 million, 4.3 million. Like,
yeah. I mean, if you're not doing like top NIM rating, 228 augments are perfectly fine.
Exactly. So unless you're pushing that type of like bleeding edge kind of progression.
I mean, even if you are doing NIM rating, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not even going to lie. I most recently, like as of like a couple of weeks ago, finally increased, went from the 238 or the purple augments to the gold augments on my sniper and my power tech. But I've been playing this game, I've been back in the game for about 5 months now, and I just now increased that bit. But that's because I wanted to. I wanted to push that level of content. So, different stats. So let's talk a little bit about what type of classes need what type of augments. So all DPS need at least how many augments? Accuracy augments. 3, right?
Well, it depends on the build you run, actually, but it really is just about getting to the threshold of 737 alacrity.
So we went 737 alacrity.
Accuracy.
Sorry. Accuracy for all DPS, right? Not just one set. It's all DPS need, which puts them at a percentage of like 110.223, right?
Yeah, you need at least 110% accuracy because all raid bosses have a natural 10% defense chance, which means, and your accuracy over 100% reduces that against your attack. So if you have 110%, it means that they don't have any defense chance against your attacks, and you absolutely need that.
Okay. So, what about tanks? Do tanks and healers need accuracy augments?
Well, okay, so tanks, absolutely not, because you get an extra 10% accuracy just as a part of your stance. Healers, that's a personal preference, which I guess Tom can talk about a little bit.
That depends on the fight, really, because the last thing you want to do is do Styrac Nim, and you're a Sorc healer, and your electric bindings miss, because that's a headache. I don't know how many times, like, I just completely mitigate that, and I throw on like my 2 pieces of like accuracy gear and a stim, and so I'm sitting here with like 1600 crit and like 100% accuracy and the alacrity cap that I need, and I'm just sitting here healing and just to make sure I don't miss electric bindings, because it's that mechanic in and of itself, if you're slow to respond to it, it just wipes raids. So it depends on the fight. If you have really low DPS for like Kephis Nim, having a DPS that has full accuracy for the raid challenges can help. But in all honesty, healers honestly don't need any accuracy at all, unless it's like a niche environment for it.
Like, I guess the way to put it is accuracy is never going to help your heals because your heals can't miss, but it will help if you need to do DPS in place of like a spot to help me to check.
That's true. All right, so we've covered a little bit about augmenting, and aside from the DPS having that requirement, yeah, we can absolutely. Somebody asked if we could talk a little bit about biochem, stims and stuff, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. So when we talk about the niche things at the end of the episode today. So we've talked about augments. Just going to cover briefly what is pugging. What is the pugging term? What do we mean by we say pug? Does anybody want to answer that?
Pickup group.
Pickup group. All right, so that's just basically if you see somebody talking in the chat saying looking for more, 2 DPS for EV hard mode, that's considered a pug group. All right, so now we're going to talk about classes specifically. I want to talk about, let's start with heals. So, Tom, let's talk about talents. Let's talk about stat distribution, and let's talk about, the specifics of each type of healing class. So you can choose which one to start with.
I'll probably start with Sorc since I'm on one, and I can look at the proficiencies better. Sorc is like middle of the road. It has burst, it has hots. It provides 2 of the healer buffs. Like each healer has their own buff, but the Sorc provides the armor buff, and it provides the internal elemental damage reduction buff. And each healer is very unique in that either they spread it to 4 people or they spread it to 1. And the Sorc spreads the armor buff to 1 person using Resurgence. And then Roaming Men spreads the internal elemental damage reduction. As far as like what stats do you need for like this healer versus that healer, to me all the healers are pretty much same stat distribution wise. Like there's no reason to like build a Sorc with like more crit than you would your Merc or your Operative or anything of the sort, because each of the classes just have their own inherent abilities that get boosted with crit or surge, as it was in like 3.0.
Okay. So what exactly? So let's talk a little bit about Resurgence. So what is exactly Resurgence and all of that good stuff?
Resurgence is your bread and butter. Resurgence is the ability you use on cooldown no matter what, because it does so much for the rotation. You go into the passives for Sorc and you look at the level 20 passive, and it's like Resurgence, it like Dark Heal, the critical chance is improved by 60%. And I say that, and you're like, oh yeah, 60%. That's the equivalent of 1 stack of your force potency.
Okay.
Is how much it's getting. How much it's getting boosted from. Dark Infusion, the activation time is reduced. Innervate, the crit chances by 25%. Which, if you know a Sorc healer, the stacks off of your Innervate is basically your bread and butter for like force management. The cost of Revivification is reduced by 20%, and it also causes Roaming Men to automatically heal each of its target without waiting for them to take damage. So in the rotation, Rejuvenate is very much, it's like I'm low on force. Use Resurgence before Innervate. Try and get those 3 stacks so you can resupply your force pool. Are a lot of people low on health? Do Resurgence and Roaming Men. That way Roaming Men doesn't have to wait for them to take damage. You automatically just have it whiz around the map and heal 4 people. Do I need to burst heal the tank? Is my set bonus up? that really depends on what you do at that point. Because if your set bonus is up, you hit Resurgence and then you go Dark Infusion, Dark Heal, because Resurgence reduces the cast time on Dark Infusion, and with the set bonus, it heals for more, and then Dark Infusion makes Dark Heal instant. So, like, in and of itself, doing those two things, you just healed for like 40 to 45k, which is a big burst for a Sorc healer.
Yeah, like, I think the general principle is if you can precede every other ability that you do with a Resurgence, well, except for Force Bubble, because it doesn't really do anything for that. But like, I think literally the only two cases where you wouldn't proceed something with a Resurgence is if it's already on cooldown, which doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. Or if you have to like immediately give somebody a big heal. So like if your tank is going to die like within the next 2 seconds and you don't have time to cast 2 abilities on them, and Innervate is off cooldown and Resurgence is off cooldown, you should just Innervate them because it's going to do more healing right up front.
Okay.
But like in general, yeah, you're going to precede every other thing you do with a Resurgence as a Sorc.
All right. Yeah. So Resurgence is the base, as we've talked about. Okay. So now that we've covered a little bit about Sorc, let's talk about Operatives. I know that's your favorite class, Tom.
It's what most people know me for rating on. It's definitely what I've gotten all of my NIM clears on as an operative. I just recently got my Gate Crasher a couple of days ago. and that
Yay!
was
Congratulations.
exciting. Thank you. And it's Operative is one of those classes where you can't be a lazy healer. and by lazy I mean like you have to have your APMs. You have to have your actions per minute up there because you have to maintain probes on people. You have to be assessing where people are at because Operative is a maintenance healer. And by maintenance, I mean it's making sure your burst healer isn't having to burst all 8 people at once kind of deal.
Okay. So what's some of the advice you can give for anybody who's looking to start operative healing?
One, talk to other operatives if you know any. 2, Mac from Failure wrote a really good guide to operative healing, and that's what I essentially learned from, and it's on Dolphy. And it just lines out like what the priorities, how to operative heal, what is an actual like where the majority of your healing should be, because you get on an operative and it's like, what's Colto Probe? Okay, it stacks 2 times, I'll just put it on the tank. But you don't realize that like 40% of your heals is from like just having Colto Probes on like the tanks and yourself and maybe a DPS who loves a stand and fire. Just that sort of thing. You don't realize how important Colto Probe is to the spec until you like really dig into how operative works.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about AoE healing. AoE versus single target healing. Where would you put, so if I needed, well, what would you consider to be the stronger of the AoE heal classes versus the harder of the AoE heal classes, and vice versa? What's the stronger of the single target healers versus the weaker of the single target healers?
As far as AoE healing goes, each class has like a good amount of AoE healing. The Merc, not so much, because Colto Missile, it doesn't heal as much.
Actually.
And why is that?
Because Colto Missile has such a low cooldown that you have really good AoE heals just by using it a bunch.
Yeah, but the majority of the time you're not going to have 8 targets just stacked. The only time I know of 8 targets stacked for that majority of time is Dread Palace.
Well, okay, but then you also have Progressive Scan, which does 4 targets as well.
Yeah, but in general, what I'm referring to right now is the 8 target heals, which Colta Waves on an 8-person parse does 120k. For Revivification, it does 105. For for Colto Missile, it does somewhere around 80.
I mean, yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess the only thing is like Colto Missile has a low ability cost compared to those two, because for Colto Waves it's like a 2.3 second channel.
Yeah, 2.6. It's 2 GCDs.
And for Sorcs, it eats the stacks that you get from Innervate, whereas for Merc, Colto Missile is. I would disagree that Merc have low AoE potential heal, but I do agree that like in terms of one ability, it's less because like it just doesn't have one as strong as those.
So one of the Merc healers in chat is saying that the base immediate healing from the missile landing is large, while the residual Colto is meh. Would you guys agree with that? Okay.
Well, yeah.
The Coltopods only heal for like 1.6k per tick, and I think that's over 9 seconds. Like preparing for all this because Ran asked me like 5 days ago.
Hush! You didn't need to know that. Shh.
So I did some parsing and I took some averages, and like for an operative for 8 targets I did like 27k HPS on 8 targets. For Sorc I did 18. For Merc I was pulling 20 for an 8-person parse. Now I'm not saying that like I'm a Merc main or a Sorc main or operative, but I do know each class well enough to know how to manage the energy and how to get the heals out to get the maximum out of it as much as I can. And what I found is just like from the averages, it's like Merc is a better like AoE healer than Sorc, but that's just because you can't spam Revivification. If you do, you're going to use up your power surge stacks and you're going to eat your energy away. Where operative, it's like Colto Waves. If you do the rotation properly, it's like Colto Waves just outsurpasses in AoE healing.
Gotcha. So one of the questions we did have was double Merc healing compositions. Let's talk a little bit about that.
How much do you hate yourself? No,
double Merc is fine. What are you talking
no. It's fine. It's fine. But as a Merc healer, it's like whose Colto shell is on who. It's the same thing you run into with the Sorc. It's like I tried to bubble them, but you bubbled them first.
Why do you have to do this?
It's like what? It's like the other Merc healer is out healing you. Why? Because it's all their Colto shells that are getting triggered, and you have none. So it's kind of, and with double operative, you don't run into that because you can have 4 probes on people and it's fine.
Oh baby.
But no, double Merc is fine because you're both. It's very bursty. It's very. There's a lot of burst. The only thing you run into is like what happens if you go to burst heal the same person, and meanwhile someone just died, kind of deal. Same with Sorc. It's like it would take more coordination of like who's going to burst heal who in what scenario to make sure you both don't go like, oh yeah, we're both going to heal you for 60k, and then like it's just. It takes a lot more of experience to run double burst healers. As far as like even with like Merc Sorc, it takes the experience of like to not overheal the same target.
Okay, well that's very good to know. What about the armor additive feature of progressive scan? That's pretty good, right?
Oh, in my opinion, it's the best heal in general as far as like how much heals it puts out and what it does, because the armor buff it's 10%, and I know that doesn't sound like much, but it can be if you have it on all 8 people, it can be like one of the biggest things that reduces damage just from a healer perspective. And progressive scan, it does 60k over its duration, which I think it's like 2.1 seconds with the high alacrity threshold. So And just how it heals is really good. It acts like Roaming Mend in that it hits 4 targets, but if you heal the lowest person, they're going to get the benefit of it. And then the other 3 targets are going to get ticks that are relative to the same.
Oh, actually, yeah. So, just to interject, every healer has a quote-unquote smart heal that heals the targets that most need healing. That out of those that can be effective. So for Sorcs, that's Roaming Mend. It goes to the target you place it on, and then from there it jumps to the target in range with the lowest health. And then Progressive Scan, same thing. For Operatives, I think doesn't Recuperative Nanotech do that?
Yeah, Nanotech does that, but the problem with Nanotech is it's limited to 10 meters.
Well, yeah,
where
it's also not a
Roaming-
very big heal.
It heals on 4 targets. It heals the same amount that Progressive Scan does.
Mhm.
It does 59k per activation.
Yeah.
But it's limited to 10 meters. So like Nanotech is something you use on the tank, and it spreads to the 2 DPS and the other tank that's off DPSing. That's where you want to put Nanotech, because you're going to make sure that it gets to as many targets as it will. Where Roaming Mend, it's going to find a target. Where Progressive Scan, it's going to find a target. But Colto, since Nanotech, it's so limited in the space it can be used, it's very much placement, who you place the Nanotech on.
Welcome back, Bishop.
Thank you.
So do you have any other... So talk to me just quickly about stat distribution for healers. Is there a specific threshold? Like, what about crit? What about alacrity? I know that we want to definitely, like, just hard insist and just advise you that optimal stats do not make a Nightmare Raider. Like, that is the biggest thing. Just because your stats are exactly where they need to be does not mean that you're ready to push bleeding edge content, that you're ready to, be the best Marauder in the game. Stats don't maketh the man, if I can borrow a quote from Kingsman.
Kingsman, baby.
Kingsman, right? So stats do not maketh the man. Stats are good, and increasing your stats to hit specific levels is excellent. It's a little bit like the Volkswagen Beetle thing. All Beetles are Volkswagens, but not all Volkswagens are Beetles.
Well, I think the bigger thing is like you need to get your stats to a certain point to like be able to be able to do the content. Like, so if your gear rating is say 230, for example, and you don't have any like legendary tier gear, you can't do nim rating because no matter how good you are at your class, you're just not going to be able to pull the numbers consistently. But once you get to that gear rating, it's less about like how good your gear is and how well your stats are distributed, and more about how well do you know how to play your class. Like, a good enough player can make 236 gear with 228 augments work in every level of nim content for any class. That's not realistic of everybody, but it is true. Now, more gear is going to give you more of a margin to play with, is really what it is. So like, it's not like you're going to it's not like you're going to make yourself suddenly able to do content by getting the correct stats, but it's going to give you a cushion to play with while you learn. And so that's why it's a good idea to get your stats correct and get your gear as high as possible.
Okay.
I agree with the statement that, like, yeah, it's not all about gear. Though you do need gear for... There's thresholds of gear to go into specific content. Now, as far as, like, what are the thresholds for healers? It's like, I teach a hard mode learning group, and I don't want to take my nim gear tunes to it. So I have an operative healer that's full 230. It's optimized the best I can. It has like 1900 crit. It has 735 alacrity to meet that first alacrity threshold, and the mastery, power, endurance, it's all from like 230 gear. It has like 110k health. But I can out heal my co-healer who's learning. And that's where experience comes in. It's how well do you know the fights? How well do you know what your class can do? So stats don't really... You can have the best stats in the world. You can have 258 gear. But if you don't know to pop this cooldown at this specific moment, or how to burst heal this person, or, not to be within 30-meter range of Zorn so you get fearful and nuke yourself, then yeah, it's as you progress in gear, it becomes less about like the gear and how well you know your character and your class and how you fit into the operation, because that's what you're doing. You're doing an operation. It's not you against the boss and I need to fluff my numbers as much as possible because I'm a very special
I'm a very important
DPS.
DPS.
It's more of what can I do to help to progress the group to go. And so, I mean, if that means that you're on grace duty and you're doing that, or something of the sort, and you're not actually on the boss, then you have to do the mechanics, because that's the majority of what raiding is. It's doing the mechanics, meeting the checks to beat the boss. It's not I'm going to face roll on the boss while it has 100% damage reduction because the royal guards are up.
So, while that, with that being said, can you give me just kind of like a base look? Like, okay, if somebody is new to healing and is learning how to heal, can you give me a base, like kind of like a ballpark in stats? Like, you want, 1900 alacrity, you want, 1800, like, can you give me a ballpark for somebody who is just learning how to heal, and so that way they feel more comfortable with their gear?
As I said, I have a 230 operative healer, and like with 230 you have a lower stat pool to work with. So you want to get to that first alacrity threshold. You want to get to like 701 plus. So mine sits at 735. And then I just put the rest in the crit, because for healers, there really is no like crit diminishing returns, because it's better to put it in crit than to go into mastery. Now, when you move into like 248, you want to hit that second alacrity threshold, which is anything higher than 1857. So, I mean, you're going to be running 6 240 enhancements along with 5 augments of any kind for alacrity. And then you put everything into crit. For like 240, for 248, my operative healer, my merc healer, my Sorc healer, they all sit around like 2029 critical. And then you move into like 258, and it's like you meet your alacrity threshold. I believe the optimal alacrity threshold is 1859. With
1857 is the actual number, I think. But you can't actually get that with any gear distribution. So 1859 is where you.
Yeah, 1859 is the closest you can get with like the best of the best, like the augments and the enhancements and all that.
What is your stat priority? So like, what do you need to focus on first? Like for DPS, it's accuracy. You want to hit that 110 percentage cap before starting to look at other things. So for healers, what is your stat priority?
For Sorc and Merc, your priority is to like, you want to hit that first alacrity threshold as soon as possible and put everything into crit. If you can't meet the second threshold, you want to meet the first. Okay. For operative, it's roughly the same, but operative benefits a lot from having the additional, like once you hit that second GCD takedown, like you get the 0.2 GCD off. Operative starts getting a lot easier rotationally to maintain probes and to fit burst heals into it, because you free up a GCD in your rotation. But yeah, so like the priority is like what GCD, like what alacrity threshold can you meet, and then once you meet that, put everything else into crit.
Okay.
Because for Sorc, Innervate is like your bread and butter. You need the power surge stacks off of there. For Merc, I don't. For Merc, you have built-in crit at in a various passive. I know it has built-in crit, so it's not needed as much. But for Sorc, it's like for your energy management, you need Innervate to crit more often than not to get those stacks.
So I do just want to point out just a little bit. When we're talking about percentages and numbers, if you look on your character sheet, for Force users, it's going to be under Force. For Tech users, it's going to be under Tech. You're going to see numbers here on the side. So like, now, don't look at this gear because this gear is old. And this is level 65 PvP gear. So don't look at this one, but I want to point out these numbers here on the side. So you have two different numbers. You have percentages. So like when we're saying 110% alacrity or accuracy, that's where you're going to see it right here. And you're going to see, but also if you look, there's going to be little green numbers, like little green men, but they're numbers. And that's what we're talking about. So so for the accuracy, for instance, it's 110%, but the green number should say 735, right? 735, 736, something. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about numbers and percentages. Is we're talking about the actual ratings so there's ratings, which are the green numbers inside the actual stat, and then the percentages is what you see as a whole. Sorry, 737 equals 110%. Thank you, Audrey. I appreciate that. So, just wanted to point that out really quick. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Bishop, let's talk tanks.
What?
Let's talk tanks. I did have a question for you. Can yellow damage miss?
In what context? There's a lot. Your outgoing yellow can miss. Yeah, in the sense that if they have fucking like Shroud or something up, your outgoing, and that's like in PvP, your outgoing can miss if you don't have the accuracy cap for, your Thundering Blast is going to miss on a boss if you don't have the accuracy. So yeah, it can miss.
So what exactly is yellow damage?
Yellow damage is it's not white.
Well, I would think so.
Yellow damage is everything. So think of your force abilities and your tech ability for the most part. So anything like lightning or flamethrowers, that sort of thing. Anything with fire. Your non fucking I'm just gonna smack this bitch with my lightsaber, like that sort of thing. Although Shatter is kind of an exception. But anyway, yellow damage is the thing with yellow damage is it cannot be defended. So all the defense stats in the world will not help you against yellow damage. So that's actually one of the reasons that defense has become kind of obsolete, along with another reason in the sense that it was more forced upon us. But yellow damage cannot be defended. It can only be shielded in the sense of yellow damage. That's the attack type. So that's going to be like force tech attack. Okay, so that's yellow. In a summary, yellow is force tech attack. White is melee ranged attack. Those are your two categories. Okay. Well, four, sort of, kind of. But that's the branch. And then you go from there, and then you go into damage types. And then you have, four there. You have internal elemental and kinetic energy. Internal elemental cannot be mitigated in the sense of defense or shield. It is only through damage reduction or a cooldown. Otherwise, you're just going to be taking the brunt of it. So that's the scary stuff for us tanks, right? Yellow, and at the moment, there's no white damage. There's no white attack, melee range attack that does internal elemental, as far as I know. I don't think that's in the game. All internal elemental tends to be yellow, so you can't defend it.
Okay.
But everything else, so yellow damage, force tech that deals kinetic energy can be shielded. White damage, melee ranged, that will always deal, kinetic energy, that can be defended and shielded. So shield is, in that sense, that's your best stat as a tank, because that will apply to more attacks than defense will. So that is from a damage profile perspective. The yellow damage going out is going to be stuff like Thundering Blast, Chain Lightning. It's going to be Firestorm, Rocket Punch. There's a whole lot. Pretty much the biggest white damage heavy spec are going to be like Marksman. I'd say Virulence in the sense of Coal, although most of it's really not, but whatever. Marksman, Carnage, Vengeance. The rail shot from a power tech and AP is huge, although the rest of their damage tends to be yellow, but like missing a rail shot sucks. So there's a lot, in my opinion, there's a lot more yellow damage specs than there are white. But yeah, there's the answer.
Well, thank you for that. So talk to me a little bit about augmenting and stat distribution for tanks. You just mentioned that defense is a little bit obsolete. So for tanks, what type of talk to me about stats for tanks.
Okay. The thing with defense is when 4.0 they changed the way tank gearing went to where our mods, for instance, used to have absorb as the stat, and everything used to be shield as the guaranteed stat, and then you had to decide between defense. In 4.0 they changed that. Every mod had defense, every enhancement or implant earpiece had defense, and then you had to trade between shield and absorption. And in this day and age, between the implants, really just the implant, you have a lot of defense, and defense has a very punishing, diminishing return. So by the time that you get really your implants, if you're running a blue stim, and then passives in the tree, any more defense tends to not really make a huge difference, for more reasons than just the fact that you already have enough and you've hit that diminishing return. But as we talked about earlier, things with defense that you can defend, you can also shield. And they don't tend to be scary. The scary hits for a tank, the things that kill you, are the things that are big single hits that are yellow damage, that are internal elemental, that you don't shield. So defense is just kind of like, oh, it's nice when there's a lot of white damage going out, like during the droid phase in Brontes. I'm shielding everything, I'm defending everything, I don't take any damage. But for the big things like slams or eating orbs, you can't defend. So you don't need to stress about defense. And in that sense, it becomes a very irrelevant stat very quickly. Back when it wasn't forced upon us, there was a lot more. I mean, people were running, I believe, Fortunate Readout relics.
I remember those.
Fortunate Readout reactive warding was kind of what people would go for. We wouldn't do that anymore.
We don't do that? Yeah, tanks.
We run DPS relics. Like, what? Who cares? In very rare exceptions do we not.
So
and that's just a few of us.
That's just a few of you. Okay, so for anybody who is learning to tank, or anybody who's wanting to start tanking, what should a Sin tank look for stat-wise? What should a Juggernaut/Guardian tank look for stat-wise? And what should a Vanguard/Power Tech tank look for stats?
You want to look at things that complement the tank, and each tank tends to have a various mechanics. So with Assassin tanks, they have the Dark Ward, which increases their shield chance. And for all intents and purposes, we're going to assume that it has 100% uptime. So your biggest thing on a Sin tank is making sure you complement that as best as possible. So you want to make sure that when you're shielding, you're not just shielding, for shit, like your base absorb of 20%. You want to make sure that you're actually shielding a pretty decent amount. So you need to you focus a bit on absorption. You also, you augment shield and you stat shield too. You want to get a nice balance there, because at the end of the day, after that certain threshold that you hit, it becomes more worth it to get 1 point of shield, 1%, than it is of absorb. You're going to be getting a lot less DTPS from shield than you are absorb. Like if you shield something 64% of the time for 48% of that damage, it's a lot better than shielding 63% of the time for 49% of the damage. You kind of get what we're saying there. So like Assassins, you want to make sure that you have a nice balance with Dark Ward, and I believe at this point, off the top of my head, with Dark Ward up, I have around a 63.5% shield chance with a 49% absorb base chance. That absorb goes up as I shield more and get the Dark Bulwark stacks. So at peak, I'm looking at like 63.5%, whatever, shielding for 59% of the damage. Like that's pretty good in my opinion. With Recklessness, it's even better, but that's not the case. So there's a page that I have that AX made that I reference a bit when I talk to people about this that I find is pretty handy. I don't know if I can put it somewhere.
Absolutely.
Stream or something.
Absolutely. If you want to actually put it in the Discord, I will put it in chat.
Okay. Like I said, this is from AX. So.
And who is AX?
AX is one of my favorite co-tanks. He is on a lot of teams here. I think he's on. I don't know. He's on a lot of teams. With Schwartz, myself, etc., etc. And I like tanking with him a lot. He knows a lot of stuff, so really credible person in my opinion. Thank you, Taiga. Very cool. So when it comes to power tech, you look at the fact that they have heat blast, right? And that increases absorption. and passively they have heat screens or whatever it is that increases absorption by 3%. When you have heat blast, you use that, your absorb goes up 25%. So with power techs, you want to make sure that you're complementing that. So you need to make sure that you're hitting a pretty nice shield amount. When it comes to power techs, I don't remember what it is. I think I'm running like 51% shield is the number. I don't have the rating on me right now, but again, I'll link the page and that can be kind of a reference. So when it comes to that, you want to make sure that when you have heat blast going for those 6 seconds that you're shielding. Fat lot of good it does when you're not shielding anything to have 25% more absorption. Like, who cares? That's great. You're not shielding, so get out of here. So you want to make sure that you're not wasting that absorb, window. So in that sense, power techs look to make sure that they have the right amount of shield.
So would you say that power techs favor shield, Sin tanks and shadows look for absorb? Am I on the right track here?
Sort of, kind of. It's not that simple. It's not like you can just augment and enhance straight shield or absorb on one tank or another. There is a balance that you want to have. But yeah, the whole point is to make sure that you're complementing the specs that you have, the specializations that the tree has. You also need to take into account passives and stuff that has 100% uptime in the fight. So like on a Juggernaut, you take into account the fact that you will have 3% absorb at all times as soon as you use Aegis Assault. That won't fall off. Power tech, you assume that you have 3% shield at all times. That doesn't fall off. Sin, you assume you have Dark Ward. So you optimize for real-time, fights. And that's pretty important to take into account. Again, the page that I linked, I'm going to link, has that taken into account. So that's Juggernaut, we assume that. And Juggernaut is a bit more balanced. I'm looking at mine right now. Give me just a second. Hold on.
Here, I'm going to invite you to the Stronghold, and I want to open your gear up on stream.
Okay.
Oh, baby. So can you give me, same question as I gave to Tom, if you could give us a little bit of a ballpark for somebody who is wanting to start tanking, what should they look for? Like, what should they start?
You're just saying, I'm going to call.
Don't tank.
Okay, sorry. What was the question? And there's the page, by the way.
That is great. That is fantastic. So if you look in the stream chat, and I'll, that's actually exactly what I needed to ask. That is exactly what I was asking. So Sin is absorb is baseline, shield is with Dark Ward, PT is absorb with baseline, shield is plus 3% with rotation, absorb is 3% with rotation, shield is baseline. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah. Again, all credit to AX on that one. As far as I know, he made that himself. So.
Oh wow.
We talk about a lot of things. I mean, we talk about how shield amplification saved his life one time on Kevin.
Really?
Yeah, like we get into the minutia, and every time we do Brontes, we talk about everything that happened that stands out, how we dealt with orbs. It's fun. I really like tanking with him.
That's awesome. So we're looking at your stats right now. So it looks like you've got 52.29% damage reduction. You have a 25.89% defense chance, but I can't see anything else.
Yeah, and you can look at the rating. But the rating that this shield number gives me, 2147, gives me 51.41%. Shield absorption with the rating of 1693 gives me 46.42. But with Aegis Assault, that jumps up to 49.42. So 51.41% of the time, I'm shielding about half the damage. So I have a pretty balanced thing going on here. That's kind of what you aim to have on a Juggernaut more. But I will say this, and I might get crucified for it, but that's my opinion. We Juggernauts focus the least on, we don't rely on, oh boy, I hope I shield this. That would be more like power techs and sins. We don't stress about that as much as the other two. So, as you can tell, I mean, we don't have things like Heat Blast or Dark Ward that exponentially increase one of our tanking stats. Juggernauts used to be considered the defense tank.
I remember that.
Okay, yeah. Again, that's outdated. And the reason it was considered that is because retaliation gives me 5% more. The accuracy debuff gives another 5% in a way. And then with Ravage, we jump up another 6%. But for baseline considerations, we won't be including Ravage. So 35.89% is more like what I'm looking at in the midst of a fight. I'm getting another call. What in the world?
Somebody's a very, very important tank, for sure. Kidnapping involved.
What was I saying again? Oh yeah, 35.89% is what I'm looking like in the midst of a fight, right? But that's all well and good, but that's not the stuff that's gonna kill me. I'm not thinking, oh boy, I have a big old white hit. I better, defend. My 35% defense chance better save me here. Like that's not how it goes. Okay, so in that sense, yeah, another way defense becomes obsolete very quickly. So
I think you said this, but like the majority of the really important hits to mitigate in every operation are yellow damage, so defense doesn't do anything.
Defense doesn't do anything.
Exactly.
So defense is kind of a dead stat now, correct?
It's
It's
just
not
that in
dead.
the sense that you just get enough of it by means of doing whatever you don't even need to worry about it. You will get it unless you're running like DPS left side.
Okay. But you don't need to like augment for it. You don't need to.
God no.
Okay.
No augments. You don't run the fortunate readout. None of that. Imperiling Serenity.
Okay.
Really get that out of the game for God's sake. Nobody ever
Goodbye.
I've never met a person who says, "Yeah, Imperiling Serenity might have been good in this situation." Like, thank you. I got a 5-stack orb here. I'm gonna eat with Imperiling Serenity. Way to go. Well, I don't know.
Oh no, why'd they still die?
Dude, I didn't resist it. That's another thing you have to take into account too. Like I said, defense does not increase resist chance. It's only white damage. So a pretty common misconception I've heard is people think I have defense, so I'm gonna resist more. No, it doesn't. It doesn't have any impact on resist, aka yellow damage defending. It's only for white damage that defense matters. And at the same time, if you don't defend, then the attack goes on to a shield roll. Then your shield rolls against that, and if the shield wins, then you shield it. If you don't, you take the whole hit. You hope your damage reduction saves you. Defense rolls first, then shield, and that's the way it goes. But if you don't defend, you shield. But if you shield, you don't always defend. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, okay, there you go.
So let's talk. We've talked about tanks. We've talked about healers. Let's talk about DPS. So same question to you, Sorc, and same question to you, Spliz. Stat distribution. Like what as, talk to me a little bit about, so there's two different types of DPS. There's high alacrity classes and there's low alacrity classes. Talk to me a little bit about the stats required for those.
Well, I will say, like, the whole thing with alacrity is it really just comes down to your rotation performing and your procs lining up differently. That's all dependent on how much alacrity you've stacked. So for different disciplines, there's different tiers that you want to hit in terms of the alacrity number. And it's different for, pretty much most disciplines for the low or mid alacrity builds. But for high alac, the number is always 1857.
Okay, so what are the high alacrity classes?
Well, any class can be run as high alacrity, to be honest, and it's optimal for all melee classes and some ranged classes. The only ones that I would say you can really get away with not running high alacrity are Sniper and Merc. And for Merc, it's not even true of every. Or for Sniper, it's not true of all three disciplines. The high alacrity threshold for every class except for Lightning, Carnage, and Arsenal is going to be 1857 alacrity. Get as close to that without going under it with your stats, and then just dump the rest into crit. You will not have too much crit because of just the way the stat distribution is. It's actually, like, for high alacrity classes, it's really easy to gear just because of that.
Okay. So every DPS needs to hit that 110 accuracy cap, though.
Yes.
Okay, so here's a question. Can anyone have too much crit? Is there a diminishing return on crit?
There isn't. Something that I actually did. I did a little bit of figuring on a while ago, which it's out of date because I haven't rerun the numbers for 258 gear, but there is actually a point where crit gives you less of a DPS increase than mastery does, and that point is around 1800 crit.
1800 crit.
Yeah.
Okay.
What was I gonna say? It's different now that the stats have changed due to 258 gear. But it's still like there is a point where you're better off dumping stat into mastery than you are into crit, because the amount of increase that you get from an extra percentage increase in crit is less than for putting it into math.
So would you say that the 1800 crit, that's like your hard cap? Would you consider that like don't go ever? So once
I'd
you
say that's more of a soft cap.
soft caps. Okay. Audrey is saying that the crossover point is between 18 to 1900, so having crit somewhere in that range is good. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
There you go.
that is correct.
All right. So 1900 is our hard cap for crit, correct?
I don't think hard
Yeah.
cap is really
Just your
correct.
optimal cap. Your optimal.
Optimal cap. Okay. Okay. Awesome. So I do know that a couple of people have to leave soon, correct? I know somebody has some raids this evening. Is that correct? Stack presence. Yes, presence. Stack
Yes,
presence. So let's talk a little bit about group composition and class stacking.
Double PT tank! Oh, hi!
Please, God, no. I can only handle one of you guys.
We'll do it on Brontes then. Not
Let's-
every fight, we'll just do it on one.
So, class stacking. What do you guys consider class stacking?
3 PTs on Brontes.
Oh, baby.
Wow, what do you mean the...
So, like, so in WoW, people consider class stacking to bring in, like, 5 rogues. So, is there a point in an operation, of any sort of operation, Chug DPS is the new meta, hell yeah, where too much of one class is a detriment?
I think that's true for any class, but like, hold on. Yeah, any class, like the main reason that you don't want to bring too many of the same class is that you're repeating utility that each class brings, and sometimes that's like more of it is better, sometimes, and most of the time it's not. So like, for example, you can bring multiple snipers, and multiple sniper shields will be helpful for sure. But like, if you were to say bring multiple like marauders, you're not going to get more bloodthirst out of it. So it doesn't help as much. Like, given more preds is helpful, but more blood is not going to help.
Bring
also,
4 PTs and go AFK, close and personal will do the rest.
One other thing about running multiple of the same class is that every class provides a unique set of debuffs that it applies to the target, and if you have a lot of the same class, you're not getting a variety of debuffs, which is going to cap your DPS potential for the group.
Okay, so what classes bring what debuffs?
It's not really the correct question, because different specs of different classes actually bring different debuffs.
Okay, let me rephrase that question then. There's an armor debuff, which is done by APPT, Tactics Vanguard, Marksman Sniper, and Sharpshooter Slinger, and Vengeance Juggernaut, and Vigilance.
Both Juggernauts, actually.
Both. So both DPS specs for Juggernaut and Guardian bring an armor debuff. Are there any other classes that bring an armor debuff? Deception Sin, Infiltration, Arsenal,
Merc,
Merc, Carnage, Marauder, Combat Sentinel bring an armor debuff, and it is imperative to have at least one.
It's very helpful.
Very helpful.
Like, you can get away without it, but like, it will make meeting DPS checks harder.
Okay.
The only exception is if you have a lot, like almost all of your damage is yellow damage, because By the way, so like as Bishop was talking about how you have yellow and white damage that's stealth to you that you have to worry about as a tank, same thing goes for dealing damage. You have yellow and white damage, and if you run a lot of dot classes, armor debuff becomes less important because you have more damage that's yellow and therefore not affected by the armor.
Okay, so and there's also oh, what's the term for it? Oh, what is it? So like that's only true for internal and elemental damage.
Right, yeah. There's a lot of attacks that are yellow attacks that deal kinetic energy, so those are affected by armor.
Yeah.
Okay. And now certain classes, like I know Crushing Darkness applies a debuff to the target, vulnerable. There are certain classes and specs that do a variation of those. Would you consider those types of debuffs to be imperative? Would you consider those to be beneficial, but not like you need to have a spec that runs that type of vulnerability?
Honestly, you can say like every single debuff is nice but not essential. What's more important is that the classes that you have work together in the debuffs that they
Work
provide
together.
if you're trying to maximize DPM. So, for example, if you have like a force, they're not going to benefit from the tech debuffs. Whereas if you have like say sniper instead of a Sorc, for example, the sniper is going to benefit from the tech debuffs and the Sorc will not. So
Okay.
you're just going to have you'll have a higher DPS potential. Not necessarily even just because sniper have a higher DPS cap than Sorc,
But they
but
match.
because
They match the
because
damage.
they're benefiting from what your group comes.
Gotcha. So then that really brings into consideration group composition.
Right. And like, I mean, this is also part of the reason why Splizza and I like didn't intentionally do this, but if you were to pick a group if you were to go with the group that we picked, you would have Sniper, Merc, Mera, and PT. And part of the reason that's so good is because Sniper, Merc, and PT all will benefit from the tech debuffs, and they will all benefit from the range debuffs.
That is a very good point.
Yeah, I mean, that is the biggest advantage to this topic.
There you go. So that is an excellent point there. Is there any point aside from, not being compatible, I guess you would say, as a raid group? Is there anything like is it really bad to stack have more than one of an operative DPS or an operative healer? Or we've already talked about mercs, double merc healing. What about tanks? What about DPS? Is there any point we're having more 2 PT tanks?
Yeah, sort of, kind of.
Why is 2 PT tanks such an issue?
Three. Here's the initial thing. We're talking debuffs here. There are 3 debuffs in the tank. So if you have you have your 2 tanks. As long as you do not have the same class for 2 tanks, you will have all 3 debuffs. Sins will provide the accuracy, and I believe the melee range debuff on Wither. Jugs provide the accuracy and the Force Tech debuff on Crushing Blow. Power Techs provide both the melee ranged and the Force Tech debuff, but not the accuracy one. So if you have PT Sin, you have all 3. You have Jug Sin, you have all 3, etc., etc. If you have 2 of the same ones, though, you will not have those same debuffs. So that's a pretty big consideration. But we don't really do that. The reason, like in the case of AX and I, we don't run the same tanks usually is because we don't want to. We want to play something different. We both also dislike Sin tanking, so most of the time we're Jug PTing, and that works just fine. But for the most case, if you were to double, bring the same tank for most things, it wouldn't be that big a deal. Double PT tends to struggle on Brontes. We did a kill with the double PT tank, and that was a bit of a meme. We realized we were lucky enough to have a rebounder from our PT DPS to eat an orb, and we had good DPS to do it. So in most cases, though, if we had brought a double PT tank comp to Bestia, for instance, in DP, doing double monsters on a PT is a bit different than a Sin or a Jug, in the sense that you don't have something like Phasing Phantasm or Mad Dash to reliably deal with every single one. You have your big cooldowns, like energy shield and I guess shield general to an extent, and you have your hope to God cooldown explosive fuel. But for the most part, you rely on the fact that you're the strongest tank passively, right? But I would prefer to, quite frankly, like when I run a Sin Jug comp in DP, the Sin usually does doubles. A, because I can put out more DPS on the stuff that actually requires a DPS check, while she, usually this case is L, can force speed every other pulverize. And she has a cooldown, like she has it figured out to where it lines up very nicely. There is a sense of complement.
Unless it doesn't.
Yeah, well, we won't talk about that.
I've been on the
hey, Toby,
healing
they're
end.
desyncs.
I've been on a healing end of that.
She says, I think they're desyncs. Like, oh god! Everybody, get a sniper shield on now! So, but double tanks usually, it's more beneficial to run 2 different tanks. The most common one of stacking is going to be 2 Sins, obviously. 2 Sin tanks in Nightmare tends to be what you see the most when you run a double tank composition.
And is it just because of their cooldowns?
Yeah, they're very strong. They don't necessarily suffer from the lack of a force tech debuff, because they have pretty strong mitigation, passively and in the form of things like cooldowns or phasing phantasm. They're just strong. They don't need it. Running a double jug composition like AX and I did on Tithe was a bit stupid because we didn't have things like electric bindings or carbonized to deal with ads, which would have been nice on one of the other 2 tanks. But we made it work for the most part. We weren't struggling with the fact that it was a double jug composition. It was more learning to fight. So on most everything aside from, I would honestly say, Brontes, and I haven't seen most of God, you can run double tanks. But you're going to benefit more from running 2 different kinds, in my opinion.
Okay. So what about, we've already talked about merc healers. So what about double operatives? What about double sorcs? Is that detrimental to your group?
It all depends on player and experience, in my honest opinion. Double operative is the most struggle worthy because it lacks on burst. But I mean, everyone's going to be probed, or the important people are going to be probed.
Oh,
so it's just kind of double operative lacks in burst, where double merc you have all the burst healing, but you have to like stagger the 10 stacks in which both of you are burst healing. For Sorc, it's I'd say like the least detrimental is double Sorc, because of like you've got force armors that can be spread out a lot more easier between 2 Sorcs, and the overall utility that a Sorc has as far as like barrier and how they heal, where it's not like you have a staggered burst, but where Sorc is more consistent throughout its rotation.
So I had somebody mention that running double operative healers, one of those operatives is going to be tactical advantage starved. Is that correct?
No, because I mean, if both of them are running the same rotation, like they're probing 5 people and you're running the rotation optimally, you shouldn't be starved because you should be using Culto Injection and Infusion. I mean, Infusion uses it, but if you know how to play an operative properly, you know when you're going to get your extra TA. You know not to always use tactical advantage to refresh your 2 stacks of probes when they're sitting at 100% health. It goes more to knowing how the class works versus like spamming tactical advantage just to refresh your probes when you don't actually need to be burst healing that person. Which, I mean, to talk specifically about operatives, you use Culto probes. It stacks twice. Whenever you use surgical probe to refresh those stacks, it's a miniature burst because it heals for anywhere between 8 to 12k for the surgical probe, and it makes the 2 probes automatically tick for 3 to 5k. So it's somewhere around a 15 K burst, like 11 to 15, which is somewhere around where like the Sorc's roaming mend is. But the roaming mend hits 4 targets.
So double operatives, you're not going to have a resource issue, correct?
The only reason you would have a resource issue is if you don't understand the healing.
If you don't understand the class.
If you don't understand the class as much, or the rotation if you're TA starved. Because the only time I'm like tactical advantage starved is if I deliberately just refresh everyone's probe with tactical advantage.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. We've already talked about why we will want to stack DPS. So, we're gonna wrap this up for this episode here pretty soon. But does anybody have any opinions about user interface UI? We can talk about key bindings in a little bit of a later episode. We'll talk about key bindings. But what about user interface? What about UI? Is there anything that you would recommend for somebody who is trying to start raiding to look into?
I like Bubble's philosophy of always make sure you can at least see your feet. If you can't see your feet, you got a problem.
So you don't want to be so zoomed in like this you can't see your feet.
Well, that, or if you have a cluttered UI.
Please don't play the game in first person.
Yeah.
Oi! That's how I do all of my best DPS.
A lot of people don't understand like L's layout. She has a bar where it's like just her cooldown so she can see the time. But those aren't her actual keybound. They aren't keybound. They're there. So a lot of people give her hell for it, but it works for her in that sense. But she can see her feet. So
I'd say the more concerning thing about Elle is that sometimes she doesn't seem to be able to see her target of target.
Target of target
true.
is excellent. So target of target, I would say,
My
is
girl.
probably the biggest thing, especially as a tank.
Yeah.
To
As
open
anybody, I mean, as DPS
Yeah.
or tank.
So target of target is found in your user interface. It's usually right above the target frame. You do have to turn it on. But target of target is probably going to be the best thing to make sure that you have on your interface that's active. And then the rest you can just customize. So I like to have boss percentages up. Well, you should fix that. Yeah, that's true. Boss percentage, so health percentage, that's always a good one because you're going to hear a lot of call outs to be like 30% or we're phasing in 2%. So that's a good one to have, at least in my opinion. Lots of people like to have their own like energy percentage and health percentages. Healers, some healers like to have their debuffs to be really large. So you'll have to figure out a little bit more about, as you play, as you start doing operations, you'll have to start kind of feeling it out for yourself and customizing your UI to your own. We will talk about keybinds in a future episode, probably in one of the next 2 episodes. Highlight the buffs. That's a good one. Highlighting your buffs on the target you have healing or DPSing, especially for dot classes, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to be able to see all of that. I mean, a lot of stuff in fights is. I would almost recommend that everybody, all roles, have the ability to see debuffs clearly.
Yeah, that was one of the best additions they made to the game. That and separating the buff bar from the debuff bar so that you could move your debuffs around.
Yes.
Change their sizing and all that. That's another thing that I personally like doing is keeping my debuffs blown up like pretty big and very close to my character.
So that way it's easier. So you have an easy way of just like taking a glance, knowing at a glance exactly what debuffs, what buffs, all that good stuff. Correct?
Yeah.
So you want to be able to like look off to the out of the corner of your eye, just see exactly. So that way you can see everything at a quick glance and go from there.
You want to be able to know if you're about to kill this person with ricochet shot.
Ricochet shot! Oh, yeah, ricochet shot's good stuff. So I do know that a couple of people have raid this evening. So we're going to go ahead and end our first episode here. But Bishop, Sorc, Splizza, Tom, thank you guys so much for coming in and talking to us about stats, talking to us about your stories of the raids. So in 2 weeks from today, same time, 2 p.m. CST, we are going to talk about our first operations. It's going to be Eternity Vault and Caracas Palace. We're going to talk primarily about the puzzle bosses, about, places where people tend to have a hard time, people tend to struggle. So be ready for EVKP in 2 weeks. We're also going to start bringing in experts of specific classes, and that will be a portion of each episode. So, just quickly, I'm going to open up anything to chat. Does chat have any questions at all that you would like to ask any of my experts in Discord at the moment? If you have any tank questions, if you have any healer questions, DPS questions, do you have anything that you would like to ask? Oh, Plebble, what is your question, my dear?
Does it have to do with the emus?
Plebble wants to know why you're so bad, Bishop.
Learn from the best. That creepy best and fuck really knows what he's doing. He sucks. Ask him how he feels getting ass cleaved on every Raptus. He does. That's his answer.
Hey, that's desync.
Desync.
Aussie lag, baby. Get out of jail free card right there.
Tom, Slice wants to know how he can become a better healer since he's not good.
Oh, come on now. Slice carries me half the time.
He's a tank main.
What is he talking about?
He needs to start tanking. He's a tank main.
Okay, here's a good question. Is marksmanship sniper really that bad?
Not if you're geared anymore.
No, it's not bad. In fact, I actually play marksman on several fights in Nightmare.
I mean, like, with 248 gear especially, you can make any class work on any fight, except outside of Nimgod.
Outside of Nimgods. Well, Virulence is definitely a little bit better than marksman. One of the things about playing a sniper, for instance, is knowing what fight to run what spec. Like, let's take Scum and Villainy, for instance. If you really want to number fluff, or, up your numbers, I would run Engineering or Virulence on Dash Rude. Titan 6, I would run Virulence. Thrasher, I would run Virulence. City Boss, I would swap to Marksman, because there's not a lot of target swap. There's not a lot of uptime for bosses, or for anything for my dots to actually have any meaning. So I would run Marksman for that fight. I would also run Marksman for Olok. Same thing. My dots really don't have a lot of uptime. So, but then I would swap to Virulence for Warlords. And then I would swap back to Marksman, actually, for Styrak. So it really, one of the things that we'll teach you guys is knowing what fight and what to swap. So the answer to your question is no. Marksmanship sniper is not bad. Hang on, there's some good questions here. Okay, if you are new to raiding, is there a benefit to starting with a certain role?
What role?
Yeah, so if you're new to raiding in particular, what would you recommend people to start out as?
Not a healer.
Not a healer.
I find that if you're a healer only, or I don't know, I find that you learn fights better from a tank and a DPS perspective than a healer.
Honestly, if you want to really learn mechanics and you want a shot to raid, tank is the best thing to do, because there's a steep learning curve, but there's always a need for tank, so you will get an opportunity if you are willing to put effort in.
And people are really willing to teach tanks, because there's such a need for good tanks.
Yeah, everybody tank, please.
I mean, isn't Bishop opening a school of tanking?
I hope so. Is there a way to get legacy-bound implants, earpieces, or relics? Not at this time. A few weeks ago, we were talking about Animaras. We do take Animaras into raids.
Animaras are baby.
Yeah, Animaras are... it's Carnage Marauders.
Carnage is good, too. There's nothing wrong with Carnage.
No, nothing wrong.
Fury tends to be a meme, though.
There you go, Fury.
It's a good dummy spec, but... And
it's a great PvP spec.
I don't know Fury, because there's never been an opportunity when I play my Mara. Damn, dude, I really wish I was Fury on this fight.
It's always I could have done better in Annihilation or Carnage.
Yeah.
It's a meme spec. So if you feel like playing Fury and you have the content on farm, hell, go for it.
I mean,
But-
the only thing about Animars you have to worry about is the frame heal that they do on various fights. and
Council.
9
Council looks good. What
times
are you
out of 10.
I'm talking about EV Council.
9 times
mean-
out of 10, why my stealth res failed is because I'm in the frame with an Animara, and it healed me.
Force Leech, Dreadguard, have a good day. move him to the tank frame real quick. I want Jose Raul to die.
Remove the Colto probes.
Remove the Colto
I'm
pros.
killing Jose Raul if I can help it.
Oh no.
So, is there any other questions from chat that you would like to present or want to ask? I would say that there are no stupid questions. How to breathe is considered a stupid question, though. So, otherwise, we're going to go ahead and end today's episode of Entering Operations. Guys, thank you so very much for coming to our... How is a baby formed? Come on, Rome. What? What? So thank you guys so much for coming to our first episode of Entering Operations in 2 weeks' time. So that's going to be the first Saturday of March 2nd. Slice wants to let you know, Bishop, you told him to learn how to breathe underwater because he doesn't want to tank.
How to breathe underwater.
Become a fish.
Become a fish.
I
Good.
am a fish.
All right, so that is going to be all for today. We will see you guys in 2 weeks to talk to you about Caracas Palace and Eternity Vault, some of the stumbling blocks for those operations, and we're going to start doing experts in the different classes. So thank you guys so very much for coming. Thank you for your information and stories, guys. Really do appreciate that, and we will see you in 2 weeks. So goodbye, everybody. Have a great raid tonight, Splizza.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Splizza.
Very cool.
Very cool.